Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Welcome to this episode of Alien Lizard Humanoids. Tonight we're looking at the case of Hannah Up, and we'll be talking about dissociative fugue. I'll start with the introductions. We'll go with Jeff first. How you doing, Jeff?
Very good. My name is Jeff Pincin, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor in states of Delaware and Pennsylvania, and I specialize in the treatment of OCD and other anxiety disorders. And if you hang out until the end of the video, we'll answer your questions that we got from the comment section. So please comment with questions, and we may answer them in future videos. So guys, if I wasn't a counselor, what I really wanted to do was hang out in dirty creeks, like just sit there in dirty creeks. Turns out nobody wants to pay you for that.
I wouldn't think so.
But I mean, come on, somebody out there.
You should follow your passions, but I don't see anybody. I don't see any reason to make money out of that.
Maybe I just save up some money and just live in dirty creeks.
There you go.
Will they pay for clean creeks if you were staying in a clean creek?
Now, maybe that's an idea. Maybe I'm following the wrong creeks.
Maybe you should talk about cleaning the creeks while you're sitting there.
Then someone might pay me. All right. Well, time for quick counseling. But for now, I had to settle to be a counselor.
Oh, yeah. A tough break.
Yeah.
It's rough.
Thanks.
All right. We'll move to you, Mike.
All right. Name's Mike Smith, also a licensed professional counselor in the state of Delaware. I specialize in narrative therapy and geek therapy, and I'm a self-styled expert in all things geek. And if I hadn't become a counselor, I really wanted to become a ferry boat captain. I have family history in the Navy, but I don't really like going out, where I can't see land on boats. So I was like, ferry, I could be a captain on a ferry boat.
It's a good choice.
But there's not really many ferries around here. You've got bridges over to Jersey, bridges over the canals, and bridges over the bridges. Just kind of killed my career idea.
There's a ferry to Cape May, right?
Yeah.
Lewis. That's the only one I think around here. Yeah. So really not many jobs. Yeah.
Not in the general area. So I was like, okay, I gotta go be a counselor.
That's tough.
Yeah, another disappointment.
So it's kind of like that song, like, what was it? Video killed the radio star. Yeah. Bridges killed the ferry boat.
Killed the ferry boat captain.
Might as well make another song out of it.
Yeah, they could.
What was that movie where there was like somebody on a ferry when you drive on, and they drove the car off into the water? Maybe a few movies do that, but it was
I've seen a few of those.
Yeah, it was a device in a movie, and I thought that is kind of a bad idea to have the cars just. I guess it's helpful because you need your car wherever you're going, but I could see how somebody could drive it right off.
Yeah.
You know what I found out the hard way, you never want to do, at least on some ferries, is be the first car in line, because the front of it is presumably open, so you can just drive right on, right? They open it up at the end. But the ferry that I was on, going from Long Island to Connecticut, I think, was it was kind of open at the front, even though we were riding on the boat. It was open, and all the seawater coming up and like the air and stuff like that. The car, the front of it was just destroyed. Like it looked so disgusting from all the seawater and everything. I didn't anticipate it. Now this was going to our honeymoon, so we had just married written all over it. So we go to this place, and we're like, hey, we need the car washed. And the guy said, and it said True Love on the back. He said, I'm not erasing True Love. And we're like, okay, that's pretty corny, but all right, that was a good one. That was a pretty good one. So don't be the front. That's my advice.
That's fair.
You want to be in the middle or the back, I guess.
Anywhere but the front, apparently.
Yeah. Also, you don't want to be on a ferry when Spider-Man's on. Apparently, according to Homecoming.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah, that was another pretty good ferry scene in a movie.
Ferries are pretty important to movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've been in quite a few.
Can be, yeah.
Yeah, so that would have been a good job.
It would have been. I had to settle for being a counselor.
Oh, not meant to be. So this is a very odd case, even for alien lizard humanoids. Usually when somebody goes missing, and in this case, Hannah Emily Up went missing, they go missing once, and then we speculated about it for a few hours.
Yeah.
This young lady went missing 3 separate times. And not like one day, the next day, and the third day, but separated by years. I don't know if I've ever heard of a case like that where the person is now missing, and presumed dead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, so her family would take exception with that. Like her mom and some of her friends are just like, she's not dead. She's out there somewhere. We just got to find her. Not many of the authorities are presuming she's dead at this point.
Yeah, I would say it seems pretty likely. She is, given the circumstances, which we'll talk about. But we know, of course, families obviously want to hold out hope much of the time. Makes sense that they would think that there could be some other outcome, and there could be. Who knows? So let's get a summary of this case. Again, kind of a meandering case that goes on, has some kind of slower parts for some years, but then some real action.
Yeah. So Hannah Up, so the first time that she disappeared was September 2008. Now, she was a teacher, okay? And so September 2008, supposed to be her first day of middle school where she was working in Harlem, and didn't show up. So later on, people would see her like in an Apple store. They would see on the surveillance video as well, and somebody confronted her as well and said, "Hey, are you Hannah?" And you don't really know what she said, but so then September 16th, she's found face down in the water near the Statue of Liberty, and they thought that she was dead. She was lying face down in the water, and they pull her up, and she gasped for air. So it would turn out that she had no memory of the past 20 days. Just nothing. She had no idea where she was at, what she did. Some things would come back to her kind of over time, and she might remember some things. But largely, she had no idea where she went, what she did, why she did it, or anything like that. So this was the first time. She said her last memory was taking a run near her apartment the day that she went missing. They had brain scans, couldn't find anything wrong. So she was diagnosed with dissociative fugue, which we know is a rare disorder, and one where commonly, and we'll talk more about this, but commonly because of some kind of trauma or some kind of issue, somehow the person goes somewhere and they don't have memory of what they do, where they go, who they are really, or any kind of identity thing. Autobiographical memory is just lost during that time. So these people aren't usually found because, as we saw in the as they saw in the footage from the Apple store, she didn't really want to be found. Even when she was confronted, she ran from that person. So it's an interesting thing, not very well studied, because not a lot of cases of it, and even when there are, these people aren't easily found, and there's not a lot of detail. So it's a very interesting thing. So this is the first time that she is that she goes missing. So that was September 2008. September 2012, went missing again on her first day of school. She didn't make it to school for that first day. Now, she was working at a Montessori school in Kensington, Maryland at the time. Her mom received a phone call that day that police had found her belongings, and they found out that nobody had talked to Hannah for about 24 hours. So the next day, next evening, her mom gets a call from Hannah, and she's found in a dirty creek about a mile and a half from her school. So she was hanging out in a dirty creek for some reason.
If somebody had been standing there.
If only.
Do you think she was getting paid for that?
I mean, probably.
With my
with my money. So again, we see this. She entered into a fugue and had no idea. She had likely been walking for those 2 days or so, and had no idea what she was doing. But they were able to look at her text messages and see the point where she doesn't remember sending them. So they were able to kind of trace it, but then after that, they don't really know what happened. So this brings us, she went back to work, a few days after that. This brings us to September 14th. This was the last time, 2017. It was the last time anybody saw Hannah. She had left for work that morning, but never made it to work. So they would later find her. I'm sorry, I skipped a detail here. She had moved to U.S. Virgin Islands at that point to work at another Montessori school. So this was supposed to be, she moved there in September 2013.
That's the island of St. Thomas, I believe.
St. Thomas, yep. So September 14th, 2017, still on the islands, and last time that anybody saw Hannah. So again, she presumably entered into another fugue state, and found her dress, sandals, car keys on her favorite beach. Found her car. It was parked. It had a purse, her wallet, her phone, and her passport. And nobody knew where she's at. Nobody had talked to her for a bit. And, of course, she hadn't used her phone. So nobody was aware of any contact with her recently as well. So at this point, since then, Hannah's been missing. And so her family has kind of held out hope that maybe she's out there somewhere. As we see with some other people who enter a fugue state, they're found many years later sometimes. But in this instance, there was a hurricane right before she went missing, a few days before she went missing. And there was a hurricane that came a few days after she went missing. So family's holding out hope, although, of course, there are other people who presume that she's dead. So at this point, nobody knows where Hannah's at, and they haven't seen her since then. So a lot of interesting details and a lot of unknown things and a lot of questions still.
Yeah. This is an interesting case because you have this diagnosis, dissociative fugue, which we'll talk about in detail. And yeah, I think the short story is that people usually hear the story and think, okay, she had the fugue. Long story is most clinicians don't believe the fugue exists. Right? Just like all dissociative disorders, they're highly speculative. Dissociative fugue in particular, it's actually a specifier for dissociative amnesia, but the fugue has a separate personality typically, not diagnostically, but in practice, which makes it sound like another disorder that a lot of people question highly, dissociative identity disorder.
Right.
Some would argue that the fugue is like a mini DID episode. So we kind of enter into an area we'll talk about, that I think is fantasy, largely. But this is a confusing case. I mean, this is one way to explain it, but I think there are some other ways that are much, much more likely that could explain her behavior, because it seems so purposeful. We'll get to like the details of it, but let's take a look at her background a bit.
Before we do that, I want to touch on a couple of things when it comes to dissociation. The first one is the pronunciation. It is dissociation. A lot of people out there will pronounce it disassociation.
Right? They'll add
the A in there. I haven't heard. I was watching a show in this case. It was on A&E, and there was a reporter, journalist, who was like, disassociation. I'm like, no, it's dissociation. It's just how it's spelled. It DISS. I think it just goes dissociation.
All one word.
All one word. The other thing is that dissociation has to do with memory. Every type of dissociation has to do with memory. So everything, and I do think that we'll get into specifics about the dissociative disorders, but dissociation is a thing. Like, it is a real thing, because memory can be affected by a great number of things, but it usually shows up as a feature of other disorders. People with PTSD have flashbacks. That's a dissociative event. Like, that's a thing that happens. Like, these things happen, but they're usually part of something else. People with depression or even ADHD can have some minor dissociative episodes where they're not forming new memories, or like they sit there for hours staring at a place and then like, what did I just do? I don't know. And they've had problems with that memory issue. So dissociative stuff is a thing, but the disorders, like they tend to be too short-lasting episodes and not as, not that prevalent and tied to something else.
Yeah, I think the argument would be, I was reading some fascinating journals on this, preparing for the video. The argument would be that dissociation really has a fantastical component that's not supported in depersonalization, derealization, which articles would argue, some science would argue, no, that's what's going on. Like, we've all had that, where we didn't feel like one with our body, or like when you fall into sleep, sometimes it happens, or separate from your reality, like, going under anesthesia or something, derealization. But is that truly a personality split? Is it really dissociative, or is it simply derealization? Is it an expansion of kind of like daydreaming, or kind of like that out-of-body experience, which is normative? A lot of people have that through many cultures. So that's really, I think, the argument is what do we mean by dissociative? And in practice, I feel like a lot of clinicians essentially think it's supernatural. That's the bottom line.
I don't think it is.
No, well, it's not. I don't think it is at all. No, but that's what you hear. Like, when you argue with people who are like dead set on DID, it reduces to it's supernatural. That's where you end up, because there's absolutely no scientific way you could ever prove the existence of multiple personalities. I mean, the brain scans tell us they're not there. So unless they show up on brain scans and we see little personalities, however that would look in a brain, I don't know. But Outside of
We just
that,
got to zoom in further. We'll find
They're
the file
little
folders.
people.
you see a little nameplate.
We'll find the file folders that have the little nameplates on them. Just got to zoom in a little bit further.
You know, there were articles that, you know, people make those associations like, oh, you know, it has a religious-based thing or supernatural thing, you know, whatever. And they make references to, like, speaking in tongues and being in trances and demonic possession and things like that.
Very often.
And so, of course, no one can prove those things, but that's kind of the point, right? Is faith, you know, you can't prove it. It's just unseen. And so it's an interesting crossover there because we don't normally, those worlds don't normally connect on that kind of level. Like, you know, there's a group of people that believe that those things happen and are very true. And then, of course, there's clinicians that have to deal with people who say that these things happen as well. And it's, you know, so there's the science and then there's the faith, and it's a lot of reckoning to do, a lot of trying to figure out, you know, what's really happening.
Yeah. To me, it's kind of like demon possession, right? Like if you have a client and they're like, I was possessed by a demon, you can work with that. No problem. That's a faith system. If they say they had dissociation, it's like, okay, that could be too, but that's also the name of a diagnosis, which is kind of weird to me. Like it puts us in an uncomfortable spot. If demon possession was in the DSM, I would say the same thing.
Sure.
That would be actually the perfect analogy. It's like, well, it's in here, so I guess I have to diagnose you with this condition, even though it's not really scientific. The DSM is supposed to be based on what we can prove.
Yeah.
It's based on scientific materialism, not as an ideology, but just as a matter of practicality. That's the only way we can test things. And, you know, repeated experiments. Without repeated experiments, we don't really know for sure.
And the major issue that a lot of people who have problems with dissociative disorders is all we have is a handful of case studies, by and large. Like there are very, very few, you know, studies of large numbers of people that have demonstrated any kind of positive.
Substantively, none.
Yeah.
There's no studies like that. Yeah, there's like five people.
And the studies that have been done have never been replicated. No. So it's like, okay, well, we've got all this data from this study. Like, okay, well, have we replicated that? But that's a problem with science in general these days. You know, it's really great to be the first person to find something out. It's not so great to be the 15th person to find it out.
It's exciting when you're in the front.
But to be honest, it's the 15th person that actually is confirming this for the most part. And I think the 150th person to do an experiment really should be, you know, we should be doing that. We should be promoting that because, you know, when we get up to that point, we got more data points.
Arguably more exciting.
Yeah, especially for something that is going to be officially listed in the DSM. So, like, there's plenty of things that people can have that aren't in the DSM that I believe are true, like unipolar mania. I think that's a real thing. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't rise to the level where we need a diagnosis. Arguably, unipolar mania is more common than any of the dissociative disorders. So I feel like they're taking a very rare phenomenon and trying to codify it, categorize it, and they're using the same people in the same work groups year after year. Like, you need new people, you need skeptics on there. If you look at the research literature, it's all the same people basically writing the same article, which is people like us, like scientifically minded, we're harming people because we don't believe in the diagnosis. That's what they pretty much all say. And look at the names, who wrote them. It's always the same. Really, it's like 4 different people, right? That write all of them. It's like, we've heard this story so many times, but you're not showing me actual data. And if you do, well, you said, Mike, they're not replicating the results.
Right. I mean, it brings, you saying like there's a small community of people who are replicating or who are doing these articles and basically writing the same article over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And there's a small number in geek therapy because it's a brand new, you know, kind of ideology in the therapeutic community. There are very few people writing on that at this point. So there's a number of different names that keep popping up every time I look for articles. And some of them are like, I really want to meet these people because they're really amazing. But it seems like every year there's a new one coming in. So like it's expanding. The DID stuff isn't expanding.
No.
So you have the people who are writing these articles, and then the half of the mental health community that reads them and accepts them as blind faith and goes, DID is a real thing.
Yeah, we know that 80% of doctoral level clinicians do not believe DID is real. And if you look at the research literature, that's not apparent because you see so many articles, again, saying those people, those 80%, are just, they haven't had, you see these words, they haven't had special knowledge given to them. They don't see beyond the science. Why are they trying to look beyond science?
Special knowledge. We hear a lot of that when we talk about conspiracy theories.
Mm-hmm.
I was envisioning knowledge coming down from a UFO or something. Oh, I've been enlightened by the special knowledge.
They're one step away from using the word enlightened. When I see that, that's going to be it. Like, you know what? I'm not reading that author anymore.
Dr. Grande, you had said a little bit ago about testing these things, and you were talking about demon possession, and all I pictured was a demon sitting down at a table taking a test or something. And that might as well just be what we'd like, invite all the demons in to test. Right?
Take a test.
I'm a demon. I never tried to give a voice to a demon, but I guess that might as well be it.
I always pictured like a screaming. I don't know why.
All right, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, might as well.
Like a shrieking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what.
I'm not going to shriek on
They seem upset. They seem upset because the burning.
I think they would be. The burning itchy discharges is a problem. But I mean, despite the fact that I'm not one of the believers of DID. Spoiler alert. I don't think DID is a thing. Most of the dissociative disorders, I don't give any credence to just because of the lack of evidence to it. But I have a client. I've been working with a client for a while now who was diagnosed by a previous clinician with DID, and this client embraces it fully. Mm-hmm. And I've said before in previous episodes, when it comes to diagnostic stuff, I use that to get paid by insurance companies. So I put a diagnostic code in, and I get paid, and I write notes when we talk. If this client wants to talk about DID stuff, mm-hmm. I will talk about that.
Yeah, well, because that's still integrity there because it is in the DSM,
right? And whether I believe it or not is immaterial, mm-hmm. because it's meeting the client where they are, and that's the important thing. So I think that with the argument that these particular, I don't want to say pseudoscientists, because many of them do have actual scientific credentials. Where they're coming from, that argument they use, we're doing harm to these people if we're not.
Yeah, that's magic.
But we're not.
No.
Even if we don't accept the diagnosis, if we're meeting the client where they are, we can. And with narrative therapy, I talk about externalization all the time. So I was like, hey, we'll take your problem issue and make it a thing that has a personality all on its own. Mm-hmm. It does things. So. Yeah. Sure. I mean,
you might be making them DID.
A very important thing in narrative therapy when externalizing, though, is not to externalize voices. If a person's hearing voices, we do not externalize that. No, we leave that alone. You'd be like, okay, so schizophrenia might be making you do all of these things. Schizophrenia is also giving you voices, but those voices are still yours. They still belong in your head. And it's a fine line to walk with that particular mm-hmm. issue, but...
It's interesting because kind of where I fall on things is, I'm skeptical, but in the people that are really angry about DID, which I'm not angry about, I'm just skeptical that it's a real diagnosis. But the ones that are really angry about it, they assign a lot of negative attributes to these limited number of scientists that I was talking about, basically suggesting they're doing this to get paid. I didn't think much of it, but I looked into it. Apparently they do get paid a tremendous amount of money, way more than you would expect for an average clinician. There was one reference where there was some program, they're getting $20,000 in about a week.
Wow.
From one client.
I'm going to change my mind about DID.
You know what? I think DID is an excellent diagnosis.
We're going to treat DID. That's the only thing we're going to treat. $20,000 a week, please.
So
I found some data.
They're getting $20,000 to treat these people?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I imagine it must be some type of inpatient. I don't know. I couldn't get the details. So
I know they're charging each personality.
That's what it is.
It's like, you've got 10 personalities? All right, that's 10 sessions in 1 hour.
Hand me my calculator.
I can see it like this, right? They're like, put the 10 down. So I heard about an 11. A few minutes later, that sounds like another identity. That's a 12. By the end of like 2 hours, you're up to like 140 diagnoses.
You know, whiteboard behind you and you're just checking box.
That's $100 an hour for all 11 personalities.
The way you just put an accent on that word, that's not you, that's another personality. But how many of them have insurance is what I want to know.
Well, I guess all of them would be under the same insurance, like a family plan thing.
That's right.
They raise the premiums for everybody.
Well, that's why premiums are so high for
So many
everyone who's
identities.
not with DID.
You have 60 people in your insurance. How many kids do you have? I never said kids.
I just said kids.
Just dependents. They're all right here.
They're all depending on me.
So, we'll get more into dissociation. It's pretty fascinating, really. Let's take a look at Hannah Up. What kind of formed her beliefs? Like what happened when she was young? She has an interesting childhood, right? So she grew up in a small town. Her mother and father were both Methodist ministers. And apparently her father, in particular, was extremely strict. Now, Hannah was gay. She dated women in college. And it sounds like this ran into like a conflict with the religious beliefs of her father.
Yeah, her father, who would go to many different places in the South Pacific and India and all over the place, he was, I think the term is fire and brimstone when it came to things like homosexuality. And that was prior to Hannah's, going to college.
Right.
And kind of, I think that it was the freedom of being at college that allowed her to explore that, because I don't think she would have been able to do that.
She also maintained the relationship with her father the entire time she was alive, and visited, or I guess vacationed with him or whatever abroad before the 2008 and 2013 incidents. Mm-hmm. So is it the school year starting, or is it that trip and spending all that time with her father? So she taught Spanish at Thurgood Marshall Academy in Harlem, which is interesting because there's a Thurgood Marshall here in Delaware, right? Mm-hmm. About 2 miles from where we are. It's not, actually it is an elementary school.
Yeah.
I believe, yeah. So, she taught Spanish.
Interestingly, complete side note, my first car was totaled in front of Thurgood Marshall.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah.
There's some popularity for Thurgood Marshall then.
It was the Thurgood Marshall Elementary in Christiana has a U-shaped driveway.
That's right.
Right. And on one side, it has 2 big signs that do not enter. And they're kind of like, you can clearly see them. They're huge.
I'm going to guess you didn't go in there based on how you...
I was not the one who drove it. I was driving down the road, and I saw this truck with it coming. It was a pickup truck. My first car was a Geo Tracker, so it was a really tiny little 4-banger vehicle. And I see this truck coming. He's got his turn signal on, and I'm thinking, okay, well, there's the do not enter sign. He can't turn in there. He wants to turn in, and I'm just even with the inside of the loop. So I'm like, all right, I'll just speed up a little bit so I can get out of his way and he can come in. And so I sped up about 5 miles an hour, and he turns right in front of me, right into the do not enter side. And my little tiny tracker hit his like 2-ton pickup truck right on the corner, and like barely scratched the fender, and my car was just completely destroyed.
Disintegrated.
It did. It was awful. And it turns out that the truck actually belonged to the school district. Oh. And the guy worked for the school district. And a police officer showed up and looked over everything. And the state trooper's like, okay. And I'm sitting there like on the sidewalk, 16 years old, going like, my car. And she's asking this guy, he's like, why did you turn here? And he's like, well, I work for the district. I was going out behind the school. My boss said I'm allowed to turn in here. And the officer, I'll never forget this. She looks at him, points up at the sign, goes, that says do not enter. That wasn't put there by the school or the district. That was put there by the state. The state says you're not allowed to enter there. So here's your ticket.
Was it red?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The big white and red do not enter.
That's
circle.
an official sign.
Yeah, it's an official sign.
Yeah. Not like a private property where you make up your own.
Yeah, no.
Those don't mean anything.
It was put there by the state.
Yeah.
Still lost my car. I was sad about that for a long time.
Maybe you put signs underneath that say, that means you. Or you too, school district people.
You too. The Thurgood Marshall Elementary. Just a tangent.
Yep.
Tangent. Anyway, Hannah worked at Thurgood Marshall in New York City and Harlem.
Yeah, so we see that Hannah went for a jog on Riverside Drive on August 28, 2008, and she was noticed missing when she didn't report to school. This becomes relevant later, as we talked about in in the brief description. Her friends became concerned, especially when they found her cell phone, wallet, and ID in her room. She was picked up on surveillance video wearing red shorts and a black sports bra. She was seen interacting with a man who stopped her. I guess he's seen her in the news, the newspaper, whatever.
It was somebody who was familiar with her from college.
Knew she was missing.
Yeah, knew she was missing. It wasn't like a close friend or anything, but it was somebody who at least went to school with her.
Yeah. He asked her if she was the missing teacher, and she denied being herself. After this, she used one of the laptops in that store to log into her email account, but she didn't send any signals input after that. So she logged in, and that was it. There was no reading or sending of messages. The police had many reports of her being spotted, another report in Starbucks in Soho, and then multiple reports at sports clubs. They thought she was taking a shower. Interestingly, at the Starbucks, the police were on the way to intercept her, and she escaped out the back door. Seems very intentional.
Yeah. Escape being the key word there.
Not like a trance. Like zombies don't usually try to escape. Like that's why I picture somebody like kind of wandering around.
Zombies are usually attracted to the noise and the bright lights.
They would attack the place, right? For brains. They're always looking for brains.
They want the brains.
So just like when she encountered the guy who asked her about herself, you know, she kind of blew that off and tried to it seemed like she tried to get away from there as quickly as possible. Went out the back of the Starbucks, sounds like as quickly as possible as well. Sounds like it was really like she was trying to stay away from something.
Yeah, and during this time, she also survived with no ID, presumably no money, no credit cards. So you would think you would have to eat, drink, use the restroom. Again, they think she showered. That seems to be intentional and fairly complex. It's not like there's just food, like you're just walking down, Midtown Manhattan, grabbing food off of the sidewalk or whatever. Like, you have to pay for it. You have to interact with people.
Well, actually, one of the things that I remember about her was she actually had engaged in the freegan lifestyle, which was kind of going around to different grocery stores and things and trying to salvage edible food from the stuff that they throw out that they're not legally allowed to sell, which depends
like
on
the day old stuff.
Yeah, it depends on the state or the area, but you can scavenge off of that fairly well.
Maybe that's what she did.
And stay fed, and I think that was prior to this time, this disappearance.
Yeah.
So it would have been something that she would have known how to do.
But again, a skill, even pre-existing, that she's tapping into, doesn't seem like a dream or a trance. That's where I get stuck a little bit.
And then where I get stuck is this whole, like, the autobiographical information is gone, but you remember all of these things. And like every kind of article and news story and biography and YouTube channel mentions this, that it's like the born identity.
Right. Well, we'll get to the inspiration for that here. Yeah.
But it's like you have all these skills and all these knowledges, but you don't have any biological information. Well, one thing Jason Bourne didn't have in any of those movies was his own login information for any of the computers or anything.
Right.
He didn't have that. Hannah did. She logged into her Gmail. She went to her gym and used her gym membership ID.
And she knew.
And she knew to answer to Hannah.
Yeah, when she knew that she wasn't herself. You would think that would make her wonder, like, well, why did you just ask me that? Who am I? There was no existential epiphany? Okay. It just seems odd. So the captain of Staten Island Ferry. So this is a ferry that runs between Staten Island and Manhattan.
Ferry captain?
There you go.
Bringing ferry captains into this?
Could have been you.
Could have been.
It's actually a modern marvel.
Staten Island, that would have been great.
Yeah, that would be close.
It's not that far.
Like 3.5 hours from here.
I think about that. And it's probably a really coveted job.
Imagine it's like Union.
Yeah.
Yeah. I bet they do okay.
Still better off as a counselor, I guess.
I guess.
Yes.
So the captain saw her. He presumed that she was dead. She was face down the water, wearing the same red shorts and black sports bra. 2 deckhands jumped in a skiff and went out to her. Again, they're like, okay, we're just retrieving a dead body. And she wasn't dead, but she was severely sunburnt on just the left side of her body. Hypothermic and dehydrated. When she got to the hospital, she had no memory of herself, but then all of a sudden it came back. Just like that.
It's like she saw her mom. Her mom was called and was at the hospital within an hour. And when her mom walked in, she knew exactly who her mom was. Like,
yeah. So, I mean, people can make of that what they will, but it seems a little unusual. She physically recovered. She was sent to a mental health facility. There was no neurological explanation for the memory loss. Now, memory loss can happen for a number of reasons. Many of those show up on these different scans. They're physical in nature, not psychological. They said in her case, this must be dissociative fugue, which I find interesting that they would call it that because in the DSM, of course, it doesn't exist. It's a specifier, not a disorder. It's dissociative amnesia with dissociative fugue. And the fugue is only one thing. You went on a journey. That's pretty much it. Bewildered wandering.
Yeah.
They refer to it, bewildered wandering. She doesn't seem bewildered.
no.
Seems like she knew exactly what she was doing. Maybe it didn't quite make much sense, but it seemed like she knew exactly what she was doing, or ultimately maybe where she wanted to go or do, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I read all the details about the reconstruction from the Staten Island ferry, like where she went. She was on some type of, so she went to the water at some point and swam for a distance. She ended up at Robbins Reef, where she climbed up. I guess there's like a beachy, sandy type area, and that's where she baked half her body in the sun, and then kind of went back into the water, and presumably to drown. Like face down, that's not a good indication for breathing.
No,
Not easy to
generally
do.
not.
No, I mean, a fish, I guess, but not for a human.
Yeah, but fish have gills.
Yeah, they have an advantage in that environment. So yeah, just, when you think about bewildered wandering, I picture like a Mr. Magoo, right? Who does get hit by the I-beam coming down off the construction site, right? Not gets, misses him. But, putting one's, going back into the water and putting one's face into the water, that again, there's no disorder, no dissociative disorder I'm aware of that would override your instinct to live.
No.
Psychosis, sometimes. This, I don't see it.
No, I agree. I've never read any symptom of any dissociative disorder that says natural survival instinct is suspended during this time period.
They're going to hold their hand over a fire. You don't see that. Yeah. I mean, drowning is uncomfortable, to say the least, right?
Yeah.
So you would think that would be like she would kind of snap out of that and react.
Potentially, unless she'd been swimming for a long time and just had become exhausted. And then, just couldn't move anymore. But even still, why go back in the water?
And
Or
how
just
long
rest on
could,
your back, maybe.
how long could she have been in that state and survived? Like, I would think that's only a matter of seconds, not hours, right?
Maybe minutes.
Maybe.
So,
I would say maybe a minute or two, unless you're actively holding your breath. I think the world record for holding your breath, I think, is like 11 minutes.
you trained for years.
But yeah, that person trained for years to get to that point. Navy SEALs, I think, generally train to do it for about 7 minutes.
Remember the movie we talked about, Poseidon Adventure?
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if you do this in movies with underwater, but I get out of breath watching those people do that.
I think there's an unconscious, holding of the breath. Like when somebody's in the water swimming through something, like I'm not breathing while they're not breathing. It's like, oh my goodness gracious. So I think it's one of those sympathetic neurons things. Like
I think it was a terrible movie, but Alien 4 had an extended scene with, and I was like, you cannot be holding your breath.
Or when
just a terrible movie.
Or when somebody's like going across something, either they're going to fall or it's going to break, and you're like, and then you realize a few seconds, I was holding my breath because I was in anticipation of this whatever I think I'm about to see. Yeah. You watch any fail video, and of course there's millions of them out there.
Oh, I'm just waiting to laugh during those videos.
Right. But you're in anticipation of what you think is going to happen, and inevitably it usually does.
I can't believe some of those fail videos, those people don't end up in the hospital.
Yeah.
Some of them are horrible.
Back in the 1980s, it would have been American fail videos. And now it was America's Funniest Home Videos.
Right.
Bob Saget back in the day. But now it's fail videos. Like they, find a TikTok compilation of fail failures.
which is many of them.
Many,
Yeah.
many.
Yeah, they also do the epic. You ever see like the epic versus fail? It's impressive.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure what you get for that. Like for doing that, you're taking those chances for like riding a bike off of a building and, you know, even landing on the wheels. Like that's a lot of risk to bear.
Sometimes a TV deal is what you get out of that.
I don't know. There was a bunch of skateboarders who got a ton of money, and Tony Hawk himself like got video game after video game after video game where he made more money off of that for jumping off, taking skateboards off of.
Yeah, I would think for every one Tony Hawk, there'd be like 50 guys in a full body cast.
Oh yeah, No, I think it's way higher than that.
Yeah.
Way higher than that.
There was a period of time, some of my friends were real good at skateboarding, and I was like, all right, cool, I'll join in. I was not good at it. I had this huge bruise on because you go off of the half pipe or the quarter pipe, and you try to go down on that, and I fell every single time. And I was like, all right, next time I'm going to get it. And I just, nope, it wasn't going to happen. It didn't happen. It hurt really bad. It was a terrible idea.
I always wanted to be a skateboarder.
Yeah.
Like
apparently I did too. It was a terrible idea.
Really young kid, but my dad wouldn't buy me a skateboard. He finally did. It was like a little penny board. It was like, it was terrible. And then the Tony Hawk games came out, and I was like, I'll just live vicariously through Tony Hawk. Played every single one of those games.
My parents' deal was, if we're buying you the skateboard, you're going to use it. All right, you're right. I'm going to use it. And I did. I tried. It was not a good idea. I wouldn't recommend it.
Actually,
unless you're good
did
at
a lot
that.
for skateboards.
Yeah, it did. It did.
And I think Bart Simpson did as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Remember the one with the gorge where Homer
jump Springfield
took
Gorge.
over, and then the ambulance. That was great. Those early Simpsons in particular.
Yeah, some of them were phenomenal.
Like the ambulance crashed and they flew out the back and went back, Yeah. Good times. So anyway, Hannah recovered. Many people thought she had created a hoax. Right? So she went on with her life. We see that she moved to Kensington. Well, that was Kensington, Maryland. First, she went to live with the Quakers at a retreat in Philadelphia for 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She was there, but no dissociative episode.
She went there because partially because of all of the people in New York who were coming down on her for faking this thing, and she left to go with them, partially because of the philosophy of the Quakers.
I noticed that the New York Times, they did multiple articles about this, and the first one, they were very generous, I felt like, to Hannah. And almost like they were basing it like, this is scientific. Like, she has dissociative fugue. And I kind of wonder, like, New York Times, big paper, have journalists investigate a little bit and maybe critique the disorder. They just, oh no, she was diagnosed. And it's like a respect for authority that's maybe a little too pronounced.
I agree. Is a lot of that was dissociative fugue is a thing, and here is what the experts say about it, and not one dissenting opinion about it, other than there are a lot of people out there who don't believe this.
Very deferent to a very small number.
I don't necessarily think it's a matter of belief; it's a matter of evidence.
Yeah, and there really isn't any.
They're all about evidence, being a journalist.
In one of the articles, I don't know if it was the New York Times, but one of them interviewed a foremost expert, or the foremost, or one of the major experts in the world on dissociative fugue. He was amazing. He had seen 5 people in his career that had what may be considered dissociative fugue. 5. Wow. His entire career.
That's amazing.
Hard not to be amazed there.
That's amazing.
I guess that's a lot of just sitting around waiting for more people to...
It's been years since the last one. Come in.
Got to find another one. The problem is they're all wandering.
That's true.
You literally have to find them.
You literally have to go out and find them. One of the other experts, and I believe in that first New Yorker article, talked about how he sees it all the time. Sees it all the time. You just have to go down to any hospital emergency room, and you'll see people in a fugue state. And to me, I'm like, okay, that doesn't seem like fugue state. That's more like a shock state, like a dissociative state. But it's more like the shock state. Like they may not be making new memories in that moment because they just went through a horrible traumatic event, or they might still have drugs in their system that are impeding their ability to make new memories. So it might be, they might be sitting there just phased out. But there's no new identity in there. And very often they'll respond to their name.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they won't. Sometimes they won't respond to anything until someone like touches them and they're like, huh, what?
Well, yeah, catatonia is much different than, in my opinion, the way they describe fugue.
Yeah.
And I've seen catatonia. That's real. That's no question somebody can be catatonic. It's actually amazing. But they're resistant to just about every stimuli. You'll see like nurses like poke them and stuff. Nothing.
But there's a lot of people, especially if you go down to an emergency room, and I'm sure emergency hospital staff will have stories after stories of people in this state where like they will react to stimuli. They can get up and move and they'll go around, but you ask them what their name and it's like, and they're like, well, do you have a wallet? I don't know. And then it's like, check, okay, here's your wallet. Your name says this and this and the other. And they like, it takes a little while, but then they start to kind of catch up.
Yeah, a trauma reaction.
So it's a trauma reaction, a dissociative state based on the trauma that's happened rather than that. And that to me that's a brain function. That's oh my goodness, something incredibly disturbing just happened. I'm not dealing with this right now. And the brain does that for physical pain all the time.
Mm-hmm. And again, you can see it.
Yeah.
Right? There's evidence of this. You can see it on brain scans. Yeah.
One of the most dramatic stories to me of this exact thing was on an old show called Taxi Cab Confessions on HBO. A lot of the Taxi Cab Confession stories were they were softcore pornographic almost. But this one that will always sit with me was from a paramedic in New York City who talked about he's the cabbie, of course. It's a taxi cab has all sorts of cameras in it. And they talk to their passengers, and the passengers tell stories. And this particular passenger was the paramedic, and he's like, and the cabbie's like, well, how was your night? And he's like, it was terrible, it was bad. He's like, he had to respond to an incident at a subway station where a guy had slipped just as the subway was coming up, and the lower part of his body had gotten spun around by the train. He was trapped, pinned between the train and the platform. And he was awake. He was active. And like he looked up and the guy was like, am I going to die? And the paramedic knew, like, as soon as they moved that train away, like everything's just going to go. And he's like, instantly, he's like, yeah. He's like, all right. And this was before cell phones were a big thing. This was late 90s. So the guy's just like, do you think you could find me a phone so I could call my girlfriend, call my family? And like that always struck me because of how calm this person was. But that's what the brain does. There's this massive physical trauma and it goes, that's too much pain. No. Like it just shuts down the pain receptors and goes, we're not feeling any of this pain. And so arguably that's one of the most painful things a person could experience, but no pain. He was calm, able to experience it. But that same thing kind of happens for emotional traumas as well. Like any kind of traumatic thing, the brain can just be like, nope, we're not going to process this right now until we can get through it. And I think that's the dissociative state that this person we've been talking about at the emergency room.
Right.
It is not a fugue state that is persistent for weeks or months. I think that dissociative state, that temporary dissociative state, might lead into something like catatonia. If it's not, if somebody's not caught and treated, it could lead to somebody just sitting there becoming catatonic.
It seems like it's on a continuum with that.
Yeah.
But of course, catatonia is associated with schizophrenia. But, some of these things, there's overlap. And, it's all on a continuum. I think it starts at maybe depersonalization and it moves to catatonia at some point. Like, it's all, you could think of it as on this one continuum, people can move back and forth. Although often when people go catatonic, that's a bad sign.
This makes me think of, it was pretty well a game changer for me. Once I realized, like, I guess fully realized the brain's role in what it's trying to do when we see people with these different disorders. So obviously on a much lesser scale than derealization, depersonalization, but if you think of it just with anxiety or depression for that matter, the brain's effort to try to protect somebody from something potentially. So, if you're feeling anxiety, it's like, all right, there's a threat. Your brain perceives some kind of threat. whether it be the uncertainty of what's going to happen next, a situation that you anticipate happening, whatever it might be, or depression. You know, I feel like there's no hope, and so I don't want to go do anything because I'm just going to experience more disappointment or whatever it might be. And so the brain sends so many distress signals, or put up so many red flags, like you shouldn't do this. I'm protecting you from something. Or in OCD, you could of course see that with OCD. You know, a false red flag, if you will, in your mind. You know, you don't want to do this, but you have to do this compulsion. It's going to make it better. And this process of somebody retraining their brain to understand something's happening up there, and it feels so real because it is real for you. This is the way your brain's functioning right now. But that doesn't mean you have to listen to it, right? There's other ways to do things with this. And so it's incredible to have such a strong force just right up there in your mind. And the number of things it can do, not only on an anxiety, like on a fairly low level like that, but of course then you get up to, you know, catatonia and derealization, depersonalization, and just the brain's effort to protect from whatever it doesn't want to experience or doesn't want you to experience. It's incredible, you know, when you think of how much power there is to that. That was a game changer for me to realize that in practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that can explain a lot of unusual events, certainly. Like just that there's no diagnostic explanation for. So, you know, I think maybe some of these get collected together, and that's where you get these kind of designer diagnoses where they get squeezed in. So we see that Hannah moved to Kensington, Maryland to work as a teacher. On the morning of her first class there, she didn't show up. One of her coworkers saw her walking on a path in the wrong direction vigorously. The police found her wallet, cell phone, purse on a trail in the woods, and then they realized no one had talked to her in the previous 24 hours, which is something we see with all the fugue states that she allegedly had. 10:30 p.m. the next day, of course, she borrows a stranger's phone, calls her mother, said she woke up in a creek with a shopping cart next to her. They never really talked about the shopping cart. Was that just there?
It might have been. Mm-hmm. I've seen that.
Shopping cart in a creek.
People take shopping carts all over the place.
Yeah.
And depends on how close it was to a place where homeless people will congregate and camp out. Because that's an invaluable tool.
Yeah, that's
major transport tool.
Yeah. Transporting all sorts of things.
So she felt like she was in a trance. She snapped out of it. She'd been walking for 2 or more than 2 days. And then, of course, we see she examines her text messages, as you were talking about, Jeff, and she kind of recognizes all of them, then only recognizes part of the middle, and then none of the later ones. So you kind of see her phase out if you look at them. So the next year, she changes jobs again. She goes to, she was a teaching assistant in St. Thomas, the U.S. Virgin Islands. She then went to Portland, Oregon to train, I guess, to become a full teacher. I guess there's like a system you have to go through.
Certified, and she ultimately got her
certification
degree, and then ultimately a Montessori degree. I'm not sure what's involved in that. Obviously, training to be a Montessori teacher, but I didn't realize there was a full degree program for that. But that makes sense. It's a pretty big deal.
It is different. Montessori schools are run differently than other more traditional schools.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I don't know exactly how, but my sister could explain it because she has a degree in child education.
They focus on like the child directing the learning. And I understand too that they have different age groups in the same classroom, in the same environment as well. And it's not so much about, it's more about the child finding their interests and learning from that rather than a teacher kind of directing, this is what we're going to learn. Of course, there's that, but the child is also a bigger part of this than we might see in other systems. So a lot of people swear by it, right? And there's very specific toys and learning tools that are developed, have been developed for Montessori schools. And yeah, some people really swear by it. And there's a lot of schools like that all over the world, of course, but there's a lot in Delaware as well. International Montessori associations is up in, I think it's either Wilmington or Hockessin, but it's very close to Hockessin up here. And there's a few different Montessori schools and every grade level in Delaware as well. So it's a pretty big presence. but it's also not something that is, it's not necessarily in the public schools, right? So you have to go to one of these schools or some kind of specialty school to for a child to have this kind of learning. And it is pretty cool. There's a lot of great things that usually when educators are going through school, they learn about this and they're like, oh my gosh, it's a great idea. And they like learn about it a lot and try to implement it in their classes. But it's not something that's necessarily supported, unfortunately, by a lot of public schools. So it's kind of tough to integrate that into a system that's already in place. But there are a lot of wonderful things to use for that, a lot of wonderful outcomes as well.
So is there a certain type of teacher that's drawn to a Montessori school?
I guess it would be somebody who wants something different, maybe. So somebody who, public schools are great, but maybe they want something different. Maybe they find more value in the system that they use for Montessori schools. And maybe they see that this has better outcomes, perhaps. I'm not sure how the outcomes compare, but I assume that they're probably at least different, if not better, because it's there's a big presence of Montessori in the world. And I believe that it's only growing as well. So maybe less faith in the public school system and more faith in other ideas, like more of a private sector kind of thing.
I was thinking maybe smaller classrooms.
I'm not sure about the class sizes.
Or maybe safer.
What's the pay rate like?
Probably less than public, I would think.
I don't know. They're all private schools.
Possibly. If they're private schools, they could pay more.
I don't know. I mean, it's a lot of public schools. Well, around here, it's different because, like, New Jersey, unionized. I think most of it or all of it. I don't know if Delaware schools are. The union teachers?
I don't think so.
Certainly someplace in Philadelphia, right?
I was going to say yes, but I'm not. Now I'm doubting it, though. If
it might be. It might be by district.
Perhaps.
I think it might be by district. I think like in Middletown, I think the district down there is
Appoquinimink.
Appoquinimink. I think Appoquinimink is unionized, but I don't think that Christina is.
Although I've never seen a school district in Delaware go on strike.
See,
Unless I'm
that's
mistaken.
The thing. Appoquinimink a couple of years ago. They
okay.
did.
So maybe
that's
speaks
one of the
to
reasons why I know that.
There you go.
They at least had a union.
There you go.
Yeah. Overall, I know people have different opinions on unions, but overall, the teachers make more unionized. Everybody pretty much makes more in a union. Mm-hmm. It's seems strange because you have the union siphoning money off too. Right. Like they're a drain.
Well, your hourly pay is up because there's the negotiating power of the union, but then you got to pay your union dues.
Right. They get you. Somebody still gets you.
So somebody still gets you. So, yeah. But I think still even the percentage of pay increase is not offset by the union dues. So you do get a lot more take home.
I knew a guy, and I didn't understand anything about unions when I met this guy, but he was a union representative somewhere up northern New Jersey, maybe New York, around New York City. And so I'm listening to this guy's talk about what he did. He was retired. I'm like, all right, that's cool, whatever. And he starts talking about this 40-foot boat that he had. And I'm trying to conceptualize a 40-foot boat. Like, oh my gosh, it's massive. And then it started to dawn on me, this guy made a lot of money. And then it started to dawn on me, union representatives make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Therefore, union people in a union must pay into this pretty generously. And so it was like, okay, this is a system that I don't know anything about, but obviously it's a pretty big deal.
I mean, it may not be generously. I mean, it's a lot, but generosity has.
Well, yeah.
has,
you know
has
what I
limits.
meant.
But still, even if it's a minor pittance from each person, if your union is huge, that
Right.
it adds up.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but years ago we had a Chrysler plant here in Newark.
I do.
And a GM plant in Newport.
Yeah, and on Boxwood Road.
On Boxwood Road. It's still there. It's just not.
It's an Amazon place now.
Yeah,
Tore it down, yeah.
GM. But I think both had rail service, a lot of trucks in and out, busy places, cranking out. I think Chrysler had Durangos for a while. They cranked out there, Dodge Durangos, I believe, and many, many other vehicles throughout the years.
My dad did the electrical troubleshooting and computer troubleshooting on the robots at both of those plants.
How about that?
That's cool.
Yeah.
Was the Chrysler one still around when they were making the Durango? I thought it had closed before that.
Oh, had it? Maybe it wasn't the Durango.
I'm not totally sure.
Yeah. It was something. They made cars.
Something.
Yeah, there was some type of car. A few different types. And I think of the GM plant, it was a Saturn they made for a while.
Mm-hmm. They also made tanks at one of them during one of the wars.
I don't remember. I know one of those plants was making the Chevy Malibu for a little while.
Okay.
And I know that because over the first year that it came out, my dad was there and watched one of the first ones come off the line, and it kind of hit a bump.
See the wheels come off?
No, the rear windshield just went whoop, whoosh,
Oh shit!
hit the ground. And that's where they had an issue with the computer code in the PLCs when they installing the glass. It didn't install the full the glass of the right size.
Oh, I was just thinking normal Chrysler quality.
Like it was put into place, and then it wasn't like it didn't fit properly, and so it was an ordering problem. Like actually had ordered the rear windshield a different size from what it was, and they had input the numbers properly into the computer for the right size glass.
Okay.
But they had the wrong size glass, and they didn't know it until the first one came off, hit a little bump, and then the rear windshield just went whoop.
Right down the trunk.
And and just right down the trunk. They had to stop the line and restart the whole, like reset everything for the right specifications for the glass
Before they could even get them out,
before they could even get them out the door. Is a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. To me, now there's many different Chrysler products, but I've had a number of Dodge trucks, and to me, it's like in the Peanuts. You're familiar with the Peanuts, like the Halloween special, Christmas special. There's Lucy with the football.
Yeah.
Right. That's Chrysler. Right. And I'm like, all right, you're gonna give me a truck this time that does not rust. Oh yeah. Here you go. Kick the football. You know. And then they pull it away. Yeah. Terrible. But I still keep buying them. I don't know why.
I love Dodge.
They had transmission problems there for quite a while, and I remember my dad had gotten a work van, and after so many years had transmission problems. Got another one, transmission problems. All right, I'm done with this. No more of them. And he swore by them for years. He had this. It was an '88 Dodge Charger, maybe it was blue. He loved it, and then he got the vans and transmission problems, and he swore them off after that. It was unfortunate because of course people like them, but then these problems, quality problems, and everything. It's a shame.
Yeah, they all have their problems. I feel like Chrysler went through many years. They're not as bad now. I feel like all the manufacturers are kind of converging in terms of quality. Even the brands we thought of years ago as being low quality seem to be like now middle ranked.
I agree.
But years ago, Chrysler they were awful. It's just vehicles were awful. But they were cheap. And that was the thing. You could afford one.
Yeah.
And used, they were like pennies. I mean, because no one wanted them, and times have changed. So we see here that where we were in the story, she woke up in the creek.
So she was on the Virgin Islands, on St. Thomas.
Oh, we're there, right?
She'd gone to Oregon, gotten
That's right,
certified
trained.
for the Montessori school, and then went to St. Thomas.
Yeah, so this is when the
Virgin Islands.
hurricane, this is 2017, September, the Hurricane Irma hits.
It's hurricane season. Hurricane season.
Yeah, you have to wonder if this was the best choice of location for her to go to, considering her relationship with water. Apparently, she could see water from where she lived or close to it. Like she was right there.
This is something that people brought up. Not, I'm sure the water thing, but people would also ask, well, why don't you have some kind of tracking device on her? People would even ask, why can't you implant something in her like you do in a pet? Or, have some kind of ankle.
The police in Maryland recommended the ankle bracelet.
And she never
refused.
Pursued it.
She wanted freedom.
She didn't want the Fugue to define her.
I mean, you could put a chip in, but the problem with the pet chips is it has to be scanned.
Mm-hmm. It's not a tracking device.
From close range. It's not a tracking device. The ankle monitor could have been a tracking device, but it would have to be charged.
She needed a hat with a little satellite thing on
it. She also just, the weird thing is with the multiple fugues, right? Even some of the experts, as we mentioned in fugue states, are like this happens to a person like once in a lifetime, and here Hannah has, twice at this point in the story, had two different fugues, and then she vanishes the third time.
And in New York, they told her this will never come back.
Yeah, they told her this will never happen again. It'll never happen again, because it never does in people who have fugue states.
So I think one of the most important clues comes up here right before, I picture, again, this sounds like a movie. You have a young woman on an island, hurricane coming in, another hurricane behind it. Friends are all running out, screaming, not literally, but they're running for the boats. The ex-boyfriend of hers. He's running for a cruise ship, not for a cruise, but for the evacuation. And she goes to the dock and gets in line with him, talk to him for hours. And he said, he didn't say she was tired. He said it looked like she had not slept in a while. And that struck me because that sounds like how people describe mania.
Yeah.
So not tired, right? You're definitely not tired, but you do look like you haven't slept in a while.
Yeah.
Interesting choice of words for him. So she left the marina. She never used her phone again. She helped a friend prepare the school, like nailing up the plywood and stuff, I guess. That's what they're doing.
They said take pictures off the wall as well, so nothing falls and breaks during the hurricane.
Yeah, I'm guessing stuff like that. Yeah, it's dangerous. Mm-hmm. And the friend said that she wasn't talkative and answered yes to every question. And apparently she was kind of disagreeable, and that wasn't how she would answer normally. She'd argue with you. So then she spends time with her roommates. They were leaving. She says, I'm staying. And then, of course, she goes for a swim on September 14, 8 a.m. Her car is found Sapphire Beach. And her shoes, her sandals, and her dress.
It was like everything, like her dress, her shoes, her sandals, her wallet, her passport was with her wallet. Car keys were all like neatly piled in one spot.
Yeah, there was a bar stool nearby that had her sandals and her sundress. Now, you can walk around without sandals, but I'm not a clothing expert, but without the dress, what would she have left on?
Well, she could have been wearing a swimsuit.
Bathing suit? Yeah, okay.
Or red shorts and a black sports bra.
Yeah, same. It's just interesting, right? Because you're reduced to the same approximate clothing that you saw in Manhattan.
Yeah.
All right, so this occurred at the beginning of the school year, just like the other two, and she ended up presumably in the water, just like the other two.
And I think it's interesting we talk about the parallels with mania. Like, with mania, a manic episode, one of the key features is like a decreased need for sleep, right? And if a person doesn't feel like they need to sleep and they stay up for a long period of time, it's not that they don't need sleep, it's that they just don't feel that they need sleep and they just keep going. And without sleep, your brain starts to run down. And the memory system of the brain is very heavily tied into sleep. If you're not sleeping for a few days, you will stop making new memories.
Yeah, and you'll go psychotic.
And you can go psychotic. Mm-hmm. And like that seems more likely than dissociative fugue, where it seems like she went into a manic episode, especially the first time. A week-long manic episode is not unusual. And being active, running around, doing things, trying to evade people that you might know, because you don't want them to see you this way. And then the long period of time not sleeping can definitely impact her memory when she finally recovers from it.
Yeah, it's curious to me that they wouldn't... I think they got hung up in Manhattan. They got hung up on the memory, the autobiographical information. They got caught up on that. I think if they had not worried about that and just gone through the checklist for bipolar, or bipolar 2 or whatever, probably bipolar, they might have found some hits there. And that might have taken them in the major mood disorder direction instead of a dissociative disorder direction. So let's take a look at the diagnostic criteria for this disorder.
That's not as interesting.
Right, not as rare.
It's not as rare. It's not as interesting. It's a garden variety manic episode person found in the this just crazy. It's just crazy. Fugue's way better. As far as the diagnosticians in New York were concerned.
Well, especially compared to bipolar, which is miserable from the clinical side and from the having it side, but just no clinician wants to deal with bipolar, especially on an emergent basis. That's thankless work. You're dealing with the mania and often the psychosis and often substance use. It's challenging, and then sometimes danger to self. So Fugue is much more tame and novel. So it has 4 diagnostic criteria for amnesia. Again, this is really dissociative amnesia we're talking about. An inability to recall important autobiographical information, clinically significant distress, not better explained through a neurological condition or substance use, and not better explained by DID, which I find curious because a lot of overlap, PTSD, somatic symptom disorder, or a neurocognitive disorder. If they meet all those criteria, they have the amnesia, but then they can there's a bonus round, as I used to say, right?
Bonus round.
The specifiers.
And now for the lightning round, where the scores can really change.
We see, that was Die Hard, right? Yeah. We see you have dissociative fugue if you're apparently purposeful or have bewildered wandering, which actually seems kind of the opposite. So you're very focused in your travel or you're not. So really you're traveling. Yeah. Isn't it going to be one or the other all the time if you're traveling?
Wandering or walking with a purpose.
I don't really know where I'm going, but I do. Do I fit in the category or not?
It's strange, right? Like how would you be in the middle?
Yeah.
That's one or the other. Yeah, the 4 criteria, the only one that's not really found with every single other disorder is the autobiographical information. Like everything else is kind of those qualifier ones that you'll kind of tacked onto everything, so that we know that it's not better explained by another medical condition or another mental health condition, that it causes significant distress, and it's not caused by substances or anything like that. Like, so there's one diagnostic criteria.
You lost your memory.
You lost your memory. And
so if you lost your memory but you don't have distress, don't worry about it.
Yeah. I can't remember. Don't worry about it. I've mentioned before on many other episodes, Unsolved Mysteries, one of my favorite shows from way back in the day. I can't count the number of amnesia stories on Unsolved Mysteries. They had between each segment on the old show, they had a flash of the word of what was coming up, and some of them it was like murder or missing, lost loves for those cases that were like orphans finding their loved ones, things like that, and they had like PsyMed for some of the really weird like pseudoscience things, but they had one specifically for amnesia. Just had amnesia, and like
they had it more than soap operas.
Yeah, I got to the point you could distinctly tell, like, okay, this one's real, this one's not. Because usually the real ones had some sort of neurological condition going on. Like there was one woman who lost 16 years worth of memories, and she was like 32. She had a series of strokes, like all in a row, and then when she woke up, she didn't recognize anybody, and her memories were from when she was 16 years old. Like her entire, like all of the experiences she had were gone. Like that's a real amnesia, but that's a neurological thing. There was damage done in her brain that stopped or erased those memories. Like she's never likely to get those back. There was another one of a guy who was assaulted and took several blows to the head, and then was wandering in a dazed state for a while, and lost memories of things that would never come back. But then there were other ones where like a guy was, found in California coming out of the desert with just a library card. And, turns out he's wanted for a felony where he comes from. And like there's a reason that he couldn't remember that, but there's no neurological thing. Like it was like every time you're like, okay, so there's nothing neurological going on. Is there a criminal background? Is there some sort of traumatic thing going on at home? Like one of the other ones was a divorce that was happening. Like in the middle of the divorce, he just vanishes.
Was the other guy wanted for returning books? Is that the library card?
No, I think the one with the library. I
want to give them back.
I actually think the one with the library card was somebody from Canada who was kind of in the middle of a divorce or something. One of the other guys was like he was wanted for stealing a freezer truck, like where he was at, like, or something along those lines. But there was definitely criminal action. Like he appeared on the Unsolved Mysteries, got a phone call from his mom. Was like, "Oh no, I can't believe it!" And then like 5 minutes later, he's leaving the building, and the police are walking up, going like, "We know who you are. You're coming with us." And miraculously, he got his memories back.
How miraculous!
We've seen a few of those cases where people disappear. It seems like it's often men disappear, and then they were living a double life, or they had committed some serious crime, and then they're going through this stuff, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I don't remember," and the police are like, "Oh, by the way, you're going to prison," And they can either kind of fess up or continue to play like, well, I don't remember that. It was a different person who did that.
Well, one of the Unsolved Mysteries episode with the one guy, the police officer who was talking, he was giving an interview. He's like, yeah, amnesia is really easy. You all have to say is, I don't know. So I don't know. One of those segments actually had a woman who was actually from right here in Delaware, who was found in Atlanta with no memories.
Wow.
She didn't know she was from Delaware. She didn't know she was from Delaware until after the segment aired, and then they called in and said, "Yeah, we know who you are."
I can understand wanting to forget being from Delaware.
It's not that I understand wanting to forget being from Delaware. I just know how forgettable Delaware is.
I can empathize with her position.
It's like we don't have much here. Like, it's a big draw. We don't have a Six Flags or anything. We have Dover Downs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The beaches?
There's a few.
Yeah, there are some beaches, but not.
I mean,
they're pretty forgettable.
The beaches attract Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters, and that's good enough for me. If he thinks the beaches here are good enough, I'm all right with it.
I mean, other than Dover Downs and a couple of the beaches, like we got the Screen Door Factory.
There's that. They make them for submarines, right?
Right.
Yeah, there's not a lot.
That was a Simpsons reference.
Yeah.
They made spacesuits down in Dover. I don't know if they still do or not, but they did for the original moonwalk, I believe. So I mean that's cool. It's not going to bring anyone here, but I mean
there's some history stuff here, but it's not a big draw for bringing people in. They could read that and be like, oh, they made it in Dover. Okay.
Time to go to Delaware.
Yeah. The biggest selling point is we're close to things that are interesting. It's close to Philadelphia. You can go to New Jersey, although, again, it's like,
not sure why you would
yeah,
want
why
to.
would you want to go from Delaware to New Jersey?
That's like a downgrade.
I don't get that.
Interesting historical note. We're talking about Jersey and Delaware. It's actually a mile long and like 100-yard wide strip of the state of Delaware on the other side of the Delaware River that is a place where in the 1920s during Prohibition, they would actually land boats and unload their stuff because the authorities from Delaware couldn't get there because they'd have to go into New Jersey. And the authorities from New Jersey couldn't go in because it was actually technically in Delaware. So they would just like unload everything there, just out in the open, because nobody could touch it right until the federal officers were coming in. But then they had to kind of downplay that. But they had tons of liquor just on the beach, sitting there out in the open. So like, yeah, we're in Delaware. Yeah, the Delaware authorities are over there. They can't get here.
We're waving to them.
It's like we're waving to them because like they couldn't even take a boat across the water because technically they would still cross into New Jersey
right
before they landed back in Delaware.
Yeah. So Delaware is a strange place.
And that's putting it mildly.
Yeah, it's not altogether bad. It's not altogether good either, I guess.
Yeah, it feels like Tatooine.
Mm.
I grew up here.
Mm. Yeah.
Now, see, I didn't grow up here, so like, it was the place where I spent most of my adult years in Delaware, so like, it doesn't hold a lot of memories for me, other than the really important ones, like getting married.
Doesn't hold a lot of memories for me either. I grew up here,
like getting married and having kids, and buying my first house and second house and all that, and so like, I don't know, I stick up for Delaware for that reason because it's like, I got no reason to hate this place. But I can understand those who have lived here.
A glowing endorsement.
It's a glowing endorsement. I got no reason to hate this place.
That's the
you should
standard.
Put that on the sign when you drive into Delaware.
Not the first state anymore. I got no reason to hate this place.
Let's start a petition.
It's like we got to get Biden to sign off on that.
He might.
He probably would. He probably would. I got no reason to hate the place.
I can picture. Maybe we put a picture of Biden with the sunglasses and kind of like and no reason to hate this place underneath. I think that would be a good. I think it might work well.
He probably would.
The interesting thing is
whispering about it.
When Biden comes back into the state, he causes a traffic jam that's horrendous. Mm-hmm. So we get penalized for having, being the place where the president has a home.
They call it the Joe Jam.
Yeah, mm-hmm. The Joe Jam.
Yeah, it's miserable. Yeah. So one more reason to vote him out. Yeah, I don't even care who comes in. Just time to go. Not a Delawarean. right? Or maybe like one
Maybe-
of those in
maybe-
Sussex.
I don't think there's anybody from Sussex. Lower Delaware and slower Delaware.
That's a whole other world. It's like a whole other state.
It is. It almost is. Very much.
So let's take a look at the very first case. I thought this is a good reference to connect to a movie real quick as a side. The very first case of dissociative fugue was this guy, a stern-looking guy, named Ansel Bourne. Bourne, which might sound familiar.
Wow. Sounds pretty familiar.
On January 17, 1887, Ansel, who was a preacher, traveled where he lived in Rhode Island to Norristown, Pennsylvania. And I love this part. Opened a candy store. Then he woke up about 3 months later and had no memory of his journey. He thought it was still January. He walked up to his landlord. He's like, "Where am I?" He returned to Rhode Island and resumed his life with his wife, who I imagine was a little upset. But things were different in 1887, right? When you can just go into a town, like Norristown, open a candy store.
It's like, where did he get the candy?
Where do you get the money?
Or the money, yeah. Like, did he have a sack of candy and sack he took?
Like, he might have. I don't know. Maybe he had some recipes for some candy, and was just like, you know what? I got some money from being a preacher. Collection plate into that sack, and
He was
just
skimming.
walks off. Yeah.
Skimming off.
Maybe people would put candy on the collection plate, and that was his
Maybe it
motivation.
Yes, that was the inspiration. That's the rumor is. That was the inspiration for Jason Bourne. I think it was because the name.
Yeah, I think there was some inspiration from that. The name was definitely an homage to it. Probably the memory loss thing was as well. But the whole thing about dissociative fugue is the Jason Bourne disease. Like, did you watch the movie? I mean, yes, he has amnesia about autobiographical things, but he's not driven to travel. Like, he's trying to figure out who he is the entire time.
I would say anxious too.
Yeah. He's anxious. Like, yes, he is traveling throughout that movie, but it's traveling in search of his identity, trying to figure out, who he is, not just, I've got to go somewhere or I'm going there for no reason. Like,
And no candy stores.
yeah,
no
candy
identity.
stores. No candy stores.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. But a great chase scene with that Mini.
Oh yeah. It's great.
Lots of good action in all the movies.
I like it when he said like the front tire was low, or he's sitting in the Mini. Like you could tell. Like, did you just measure it? Like he just drives it, you can tell it's a little low. I mean, but it was like they were trying to tell us he's highly trained.
Yeah.
You know?
The whole I don't even know how I know that that it's at this altitude I can run flat out for like blah 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 blah. I'm like,
Your left blinker is going a little slower than your right blinker.
you would that, like, even highly trained, you would never need to know exactly how long you can run at a certain altitude. You just run as long as you can.
Yeah, they really wanted to almost like give him superhuman abilities.
Yeah.
He was superior to James Bond. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Bourne Identity also had I believe it was Carl Urban as one of the. Or it was Clive Owen, I think. Clive Owen was one of the other.
Oh, that he killed.
It was the other guy.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen the movie from 2002. Jeff, have you seen that?
I did see it, yeah. Probably just once, though. And it probably just because it was on TV, if I had to guess.
It's a pretty decent spy movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Clive Owen was the bad guy. Was one of the bad guys. He was one of the other Treadwell
Super
spies.
Yeah.
Super spies, yeah. And yeah, they had a snipe off
Right.
in a field. It was great.
With the birds.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good. I think that what Jason Bourne brought us was elbows. Right? You haven't seen so many elbows in combat in movies until he came on the scene.
He also brought a lot of like weird weapons, right? Like improvised weapons, like using a pencil or using a book. You never would have thought of using a book as a weapon in the way that he did. Like I've seen people like take him and smack, but like he like put it up the guy's throat and smacked it into his throat, and
Like Jackie Chan a little bit.
yeah, very much. Me, I'm smacking the microphone around. Just use that as a weapon against Jeff. Just go, wow.
Stay away from me, like, and then use elbows, maybe. Yeah.
So let's
Watch out, I'll throw
speculate.
some elbows.
Let's speculate about Hannah here. So, you know, I've talked about people think she had the fugue. She could have had bipolar. She could have had personality pathology, borderline, brief psychotic disorder, many mental disorders. It seems likely that that's what was going on, in my opinion, but it could have been the fugue. Who knows? I think the manic explanation seems decent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually a big proponent of that one. I think that the mania is much more likely than fugue.
Yeah.
Much more based in evidence.
Seems to follow the pattern a little better. Now, she could have had manic episodes that she never reported that didn't end up in her, with her in a creek.
Yeah.
Those manic episodes could have been triggered by the stressors, especially as you mentioned. Like she had come to her own personal realizations about her sexual identity and sexual I don't want to say preference, orientation. Mm-hmm. It's her attraction orientation is what she kind of figured out. She liked to date women. Mm-hmm. And yet her father was very, very anti-homosexuality. And she loved him. She went to visit him. I think it was every year she would go and travel with him for a while. It's, to me, likely that those travels, hiding who she was during those travels, was very stressful for her. Mm-hmm. And that when she got home, the relief of that could be something that could trigger behavioral changes that could lead into a manic episode. And that seems much more likely than the fugue just hitting, especially because it happens repeatedly.
It seems like a pretty continuous pattern for her throughout her life of trying to figure out what exactly she wants. Because you have parents who are devoutly religious, and as far as I know, she was in high school, beginning of college as well. But at the same time, friends would report that she didn't really know herself. They didn't feel like she really knew herself. She was extremely friendly, always willing to help out anybody at any point. But people would also say they would talk to her for a long time, but then realize she didn't actually say anything about herself. She was always asking about other people. So it seemed to potentially be this constant battle in her mind of, I believe this, but I also have these other ideas that, they sound pretty good to me too. And there was the instance of a friend of hers who had Hindu beliefs and asked, am I going to hell? And Hannah she cried. She couldn't answer it because religious belief was, yes, you are. But her own belief of, he's my friend. What do how do I reckon this? What do I actually say here? And so it seemed like a lot of inner turmoil potentially with her. Now, of course, she would change her beliefs. She would be flexible in that thinking and determine that perhaps she does like women, or try out other religions and see if that was something that she liked more, appreciated, or believed in more. But the turmoil, whatever she had going on in her mind potentially, I don't think that can be understated. It seems like that was kind of a driving force potentially for whatever she had experienced here. Maybe out of that, what was probably potentially trauma in her, maybe contributed to or allowed some of these events to happen, whatever they actually were. But it seemed like something that maybe she could have, perhaps if she could have figured out what that was, and maybe she did to an extent, but I wonder how much of a help that could have been if she might have actually come to some peace with all of that, especially with her parents being on different sides of that. Like, parents got divorced when she was 15 because of their very different religious beliefs. So I wonder if she could have come to some kind of peace with that in her mind, and if that could have potentially changed the projection of her life. I don't know. Be curious to, if we could magically just pick a different way that her life could go and see how that changed the outcome. Would just be, of course, a very interesting thing.
It seemed like she was running, right? She was running away. What I find interesting in her manifestation of the fugue, she didn't have that personality. I talked about that. She didn't have the separate personality that we often see with the fugue. Like Ansel Bourne had a separate personality when he sold candy that he snapped out of when he didn't at the end. It's almost like her personality was missing. which is consistent with she hadn't figured out her identity yet. Yeah. So here's another theory. This one I find interesting. Hannah simply behaved the way she did because that's what she chose to do. This is the Occam's razor answer, right? There was no pathology. When I see somebody do something, the most likely explanation is that they chose to do it.
That Occam's razor explanation could be applied to literally everything and would put us out of a job. Because like if someone's laying in their bed for days on end, staring at the ceiling with a complete and total feeling of hopelessness, that Occam's razor explanation, well, that's what they choose to do.
But most of the time, if you see a purposeful behavior, like if you see somebody throw a baseball, and you say, what disorder is at work with that baseball guy? Most of the time, I think I would say, unless he's like a zombie, there's got to be an exception for zombies.
Naturally.
You know, he chose to throw it. Now, he might be mad or happy or whatever, but those are voluntary muscles, not like his heart and lungs and digestion. Like he's throwing that. So when she's walking around Manhattan, taking showers, interacting with people in Apple stores, going to Starbucks.
The more complex the behavior, the more likely it is that it is a conscious thought and conscious decision to do so.
Yeah.
Whether memory is impacted in there or not, I can't. It's difficult to say in that given moment, but it seems likely that she knew. At least some of the stuff that she was doing at that time, and just didn't want to be seen, did not want to be found.
So she has a condition, not a disorder. That would be malingering, right? Not so much when she was doing it, but when she was questioned later on. Like she decided, you know what, I'm going to go with the malingering and just not tell them anything, and they're going to assign a diagnosis. Maybe she didn't know they would. Maybe she thought she was caught.
I mean, we do have some evidence backed up some of the things such as exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the odd behaviors that left evidence, like floating upside down in the water, just swimming in a place where swimming is not generally done. The sunburn, she kind of pulled herself up, went to sleep, and went back in the water. These kinds of behaviors are indicative of something going on that's not necessarily conscious choice driven, right? Such as a manic episode. And as I mentioned before, like the manic episode can drive the person to not be able to form new memories, which can explain, and that's evidence-based. It's based on the evidence that we see. The level of exhaustion she had indicated that she didn't sleep, or at least had been pushing herself for quite some time. And that also explains behavioral things with very few assumptions and much more evidence, which is the whole Occam's razor thing. Is the explanation that has the fewest assumptions is most likely the correct one.
Yeah, not necessarily, but just most likely.
It's actually for mathematics and proofs and things like algebra and geometry.
Yeah, so I think, when you first look at something, the default position is intentional behavior. And I think the burden of proof would be to show a disorder. I don't know. I'm torn between the theory that she was acting purposely and there was some disorder. I think you can make a good case either way, right? But here's where it kind of blends into the next theory, and this is where I think the rubber meets the road. This theory said that Hannah was actually trying to bring an end to her life. She probably did in the last one, 2017, whether it was purposeful or not, who knows, but she's probably dead. She should have been dead in 2008. In 2013, who knows? Maybe she was thinking about it and kind of decided at the end not to do it. You can make a good case. Again, she's she's trying not to get caught. She's leaving everything that can track her behind. She didn't accept the ankle bracelet that the police offered her. That would have cleared it up. I mean, she really didn't want this to happen again. That would have done it. And she moves to St. Thomas, which of course is surrounded by water.
At the same time, I've seen people with suicidality who, they go through like one hospitalization for it, and then they never want to do it again. And they will go to any lengths to not go to a hospital again. even if they have continued suicidal ideation. So I can understand where she might not have wanted the ankle monitor, even if she didn't trust herself.
I'm just curious, though, if you think about it.
I'm not suicidal right now. I don't have reason to believe that I will be in the future, but I still don't want that ankle monitor, because if it does happen, they might put me in a hospital, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah, but think about all the people we've interacted with who want to continue to live. If they were vanishing and ending up face down in water, and you said, "Look, there's this little. I mean, it's a little inconvenient, but there's this ankle monitor that can transmit your location to the authorities, and we'll catch you, or at least have a chance of catching you before you drown or do something else terrible." I think most people who are kind of life oriented would say, let's try it.
Her mom paints kind of a different picture of Hannah, in the sense of, based on the one that there was an article the New Yorker had, based on that, I got the impression that, of course, her mom is sad, of course, that they can't find her and looking for her and all that. But at the same time, it seemed to me, I got the impression that she saw Hannah as on this journey. Like she was trying to find herself, or find something, I guess. And the water played into this as well, because she always ended up in the water, and that's kind of where she found herself again, so to speak. Not only literally found herself, but she kind of came back to her consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. And so the mom, it seemed to me that it became more of a spiritual thing. Like she was trying to find herself, and this was her mind's way of trying to find herself and wandering, but not really wandering. She had a purpose, like, I'm going to go find myself. Where it's going to lead me, I don't know yet. But so then the water, of course, played into the end of these episodes each time. So it's an interesting take on it. And, so is that a suicidal thing? Or is it like very much I'm trying to live, but I don't know quite what that means? And of course, that's so existential. Like, what does any of that even mean? But I guess that is kind of the point. She doesn't really know, right? Like she's trying to find something. She doesn't quite know what it is. Okay. And of course, you could reference this with many religions as well, that the whole purpose is to be in this state, or find this state, or whatever that gets you closer to God, or gets you where you want to be in life, or gets you to this nirvana state, whatever you want to call it. And so it becomes a very existential thing if you go down that path of thought. Right. Or, of course, it's just much more literal, and there was no reason, or, it was just she wanted to do it. And so it's pretty unclear, especially, and I find it odd that, I find it kind of odd that her mom kind of has that thought process. Now, of course, she's very religious, so maybe that plays into it. But I would kind of expect the parent of someone who's missing to just be like, well, it doesn't really matter to me what she may have been looking for. I just want to find her. But I didn't really get that, at least from that article. So it felt like a strange response. Of course, everybody's going to deal with things differently, and that's fine. Do that in your own way. But it's just a very different way of looking at it, is my perspective.
I definitely got the feeling that she believed herself on a spiritual journey, from the New Yorker specifically. Right. That article was a great article. It was like fatalism. This is my destiny. If I end up, she didn't say this, but I'm just, if I end up in the water, end up dead, whatever, like I have to follow the path to enlightenment. And I find it interesting that with a dissociative type disorder, we again see the references to the supernatural. It's something I've seen many, many, many times. Like, it's hard to emphasize how many times I've seen that, especially with DID specifically, where people will flat out say it's a gift from God. Multiple personalities, or I couldn't do it without God. Yeah. So I kind of got the same feeling that you did, Jeff, reading that. Like, she didn't want the bracelet because that would interrupt the journey.
Right. One of the other things that from the sources that I looked at, like the A&E special, her mom and many of her friends often said that she was optimistic and hopeful, like almost always, almost to a fault, optimistic and hopeful, and that could speak to that as well. Like I'm not going to take this ankle monitor because I don't need it. Like I'm fine. They said it wasn't going to happen. Maybe it happened again. There's no way lightning's going to strike 3 times. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be fine. And I'm not sure. I don't think from that kind of an attitude that she would have been purposefully going out of her way to try and end her life prior to these events happening. Like. It makes a lot more sense if it's in the midst of a manic episode. She then like things are just going off the rails, 20 days, a week of this mania, and she's like she's off the rails, and she's like, this has to end, and just starts swimming. And like I'm gonna swim until I die, until I croak. And with the hurricane coming in, if the same kind of thing happened, with some of the arguably potential for self-hate that she'd be hiding from everyone else because of the beliefs of her father, mixed with her own beliefs about herself and her own identity and orientations and things. That's a big clash. It's a big ideological clash in her mind. If she's in a manic state, that self-hatred can manifest really easily. And it's just like, you know what? I'm done. I'm putting stuff down. I'm going to swim out until I can't swim anymore. But it's an impulsive decision. Mm-hmm. It's not a drawn out. I'm going to go kill myself. It would be an impulsive, like I can't handle this anymore.
Right. Like the intent might not have been to die. Right. Yeah, I think one of the things I've seen in clinical practice a few times with bipolar disorder is people taking off all their clothes and running. So something that just. It happens from time to time. I don't know if we ever talked about this before, but talking to police officers who have to chase them down, I always pictured that lead police officer being like, "Oh, my leg! You,
Charlie horse! I got a Charlie horse! Go, Johnson! Go!
Got to take a phone call. Sorry, guys."
Of course, in Delaware, we'd have 7 officers.
It'd be like 500 police officers converging. Yeah. Well, in the Lorena Bobbitt case, which I covered recently. The person who found the product, so to speak,
the organ. The
organ stood by it and pointed, wouldn't reach down. It was another officer that came by and actually picked it up and put it in a hot dog bag, from a 7-Eleven, I believe. With ice. Seemed fitting, given the...
That reminds me of the movie Rat Race. I forget what year that was, but it had a lot of big names in it, and they're transporting that heart.
Cuba Gooding Jr. was in it.
Yeah, Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah,
They were transporting that heart. Mr. Bean was in there and transporting the heart, and at some point it got out, and he was he put it in a bag and all kinds of stuff, and I love that movie. Just real kind of slapstick kind of stuff, and just I thought it was a good movie.
Yeah. So anyway, back to the people running naked. You just think, what if they did that in the water? What if they just jumped into the water instead of running, they were swimming? Or if that's what, not that she was naked, but she was approximating that. Mm-hmm. Kind of that same manic.
2001, by the way. 2001 Rat Race. 2001.
All right. So, interesting case. There's quite a few theories. I hope they can find Hannah someday, but I doubt that she's still alive.
Talking about the supernatural, just going off of another tangent, the supernatural nature of dissociative identity sort of brings up the movie Split. Mm-hmm. James McAvoy, mm-hmm. which was a good movie, an entertaining movie, a terrible depiction of any kind of mental health issue at all. But it included that supernatural element, mm-hmm. The monstrous personality actually was manifested a monstrous ability to climb, super strength and climbing on walls and things. And it connected back to Unbreakable, one of my favorite movies.
Mm-hmm. That's right. It was part of a series with that, right? Yeah.
And they made a sequel with the characters from Unbreakable. It was really good. I liked it.
So I remember in the old timey days, some of the professors I've had, who their educations occurred 60s, 70s, when DID was relatively novel, multiple personality, and they would hear stories, and it's kind of things about how information is communicated and understood. They would hear stories about somebody having like a cancer diagnosis, but then when they were another personality, the tumor was gone. And then, more benign things like handwriting changes, and they speak a different language, like a really complex language, like not something related to their primary language. And yet you can't find any examples of any of those things. I mean, a little bit of handwriting change, but none of the other examples in any literature. Like where there's literally a tumor and then it's gone when another personality takes over. But people believe, like they would repeat that story to every class, however many classes they taught. Like when you learn something from an authority, that's hard to get rid of.
I mean, they would talk about, this personality has diabetes and this doesn't. And
right.
like the blood sugars levels change and whatnot. I've never seen any evidence of that at all.
No. The way that DID and most of the dissociative disorders are conceptualized now, I think it's just a nod to people with fantastical beliefs. Like it's the work groups. They're mostly psychiatrists who write the DSM. Some other PhDs are mixed in there, but mostly they're MDs.
Which is unfortunate.
Yeah, which is the wrong crowd because that's not a research degree.
Right. There's very few of them. It's not a research degree. They're physicians, not mental health professionals. Right. The vast majority of psychiatrists don't do any kind of talk therapy or actual diagnostics. Like most of them seek patients for 5 minutes a day.
And give them drugs.
Yeah. You
right.
go, your counselor gave you a diagnosis of depression? Okay, which antidepressant are we going to put you on? Oh, you say you have anxiety too? Okay, we'll put you on an anti-anxiety medication too. And we'll see if we can use two SSRIs that are for those so they can stack on top of each other. You should feel better. We'll set you up for a month from now. Yeah. Very little in the way of actual like diagnostic work.
And they don't often understand the mechanics. Some do. Some are very good. But many don't understand the mechanics of the disorders, like how they play out through the therapeutic process because they don't deliver therapy. Mm-hmm. Right. So they don't actually see the change occurring firsthand. They're seeing once every 6 weeks, once every 12 weeks. Like you don't see them that often. Right. And they never really develop the context. So to have that group, again, smart people, but to have that group determining these disorders is a little bit scary.
Yeah. And like this has been a couple of years since I looked for these numbers, but I was back when the Delaware Professional Counselors Association was still a thing. I was the president, and I was looking to try and like boost numbers and things. So I'm like, okay, I'm looking at numbers of different professions. There's at the time it was like 12,500 psychiatrists in the United States, the entire country. Mm-hmm. To under 13,000 psychiatrists in the entire country.
Right, but they represent the entire country diagnostically.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. There's 125,000 psychologists, PhD psychologists, which most of them, and most psychiatrists, like I said, they do the physical stuff, just the medication management. Some of them, I'd say about maybe a quarter, do actual talk therapy and diagnostics. Of PhD psychologists, most of them work in institutions as administrators or work as teachers and researchers. The ones that work in private practice very rarely do therapy. They do assessments. Mm-hmm. And they use tools that like have already been established.
Or not established.
Or not established. But they also like might be sitting there using, the psychologists at a university developing a tool that another psychologist might use in an assessment somewhere. But again, that's a little bit more closer to diagnostics, mm-hmm. but it's using assessments. They're clinical social workers. There's about 600,000 clinical social workers in the United States. I'd say about half of them actually do talk therapy, but they also don't have the kind of education that counselors do.
Social work's interesting because some I think do, but it's very dependent on the class of license because they have a very complex license structure. So when you say the word social worker, that means very little until you see where they actually went to school and what degree they got.
Right.
You can have somebody who's very good at therapy and somebody who doesn't even know what therapy is. Right. And they can both be technically social workers.
There's 620,000, when I looked at these numbers, 620,000 social workers in the United States. I think about a quarter of them are labeled as clinical social
licensed
workers.
Clinicals, yeah.
Licensed clinical social workers, meaning that they had the licensure to provide therapy and were doing so.
Yeah, I consider them comparable to mental health counselors because they do get a lot of good training.
Yeah, but that's still like less than 200,000.
Right. It's a small population.
Small population. And those three professions, by the way, psychiatrists, psychologists, and clinical social workers are able to bill Medicare.
Right.
And clinical counselors, like ourselves, we cannot. We cannot bill Medicare. We're not licensed. We're not in the Medicare bylaws to be providers. But there's 625,000 licensed counselors in the country as a whole. We're the Army when it comes to mental health care. Like we're the biggest providers of mental health care in the entire country, but we can't bill Medicare.
Yeah, because of a complex series of turf wars that I can't even talk about it anymore. This was debated. Many attempts were made. It wasn't like we forgot to check a box. Mm-hmm. The counselors have been fighting for this for as long as I've been a counselor. I
was talking to one of our senators about it just last year, before COVID hit, before the COVID shutdown stuff hit. I had been talking to her aides and whatnot, like in-person sit-down meetings. I was supposed to meet with her directly, but Lisa Blunt Rochester, I think Congresswoman. Mm-hmm. Yep. I was supposed to meet with her directly, but we didn't get a chance to get one on the books before the COVID shutdown happened. But yeah, I was pitching that. I was pitching get us added into Medicare billing because there's so many people who need it who are on Medicare.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the kind of way they rationalized it first was there were a lot of psychiatrists, a lot of psychologists, a lot of social workers, a lot of counselors. Oh, it's just one group that doesn't have it, no big deal. But now looking at the numbers of counselors, I mean, there's a mathematical justification that is irrefutable. Yeah. And so at this point, if they're saying, no, we're not going to do it, they're just willfully, in my opinion, causing harm. Like there's no more, it's a small group excuse. We're beyond that. Fortunately for most counselors, Medicare doesn't matter in terms of making a living.
But one of the big wins that the counseling profession did get was, I think it was in 2020, was they passed for the VA. Mm-hmm. That every VA hospital was mandated they had to hire counselors and create a counseling program in every single VA hospital so they could offer counseling, and the VA, the Veterans Insurance, has to cover sessions with the counselors.
Yeah, the road into the VA was long, and there was different stages, the things that occurred. But yeah, finally, there's some actual movement that was, I think, helpful in terms of career and getting access to a population that could benefit from
absolutely
the treatment. That's actually the biggest thing.
It's unfortunate how long change takes on that level, but especially for the VA hospital, right? Arguably people that have sacrificed among the most, for America and for people. And change happens that slowly and seemingly, doesn't really care about those people based on the decisions they make at the political level. And it's a shame, right? Because they just get overlooked, and there's long wait lines, and there's wait lists, and there's it just takes forever in some instances to get the care that they need, and it's a shame. It really is.
Yeah, the counseling profession dates back to the early 1900s. And to be fair, all the therapeutic professions do, right? Social work and psychology. Not so much marriage and family therapy. They came a little later, but that's still a great field, in my opinion. Yeah, marriage and family therapists are great clinicians. So like the argument that the counseling profession is new somehow, it's not new. It's not new at all.
It's not.
Yeah, there's no more available arguments.
And I know the argument is, oh, they're not as highly trained.
It's
Well,
nonsense.
counselors, I would argue, looking at the requirements for the things that we had to learn, CACREP requirements and everything, and then looking at what is provided to psychiatrists in their specialty years, I would argue that counselors have more training in mental health treatment than psychiatrists do, because psychiatrists have about the same that you get in an undergrad degree in psychology.
Yeah.
They're physicians,
Right. Well, yeah.
first and foremost.
Yeah. They don't really do therapy. But yeah, it's, it comes down to like credits and quality of education. It really is math. And again, I feel like a lot of people don't understand math. It's very frustrating. I mean, even if you just add credits, look at the number of credits for certain areas, it's just addition. Do people not have calculators? Like, it just makes no sense. But it comes down to turf war, right? People are trying to protect what they believe is their turf, but really there's too few professionals, even if we're all together in the same bucket. So there's no sense fighting. Just make it so that we can treat everybody. Everybody can treat everybody.
It'd be nice.
Yeah.
I mean, like some of the social work schools are 45 credits or 40 credits. Mm-hmm. 2-year 40 credit.
2-year, yeah.
Yeah, 2-year 40 credit program. And, they get, it's a master's degree. And some of the places, like some of the inpatient places, like substance use treatment centers, the one I used to work at, I had a master's degree in counseling. One of my other favorite coworkers had a master's degree in social work. We got paid the same, but our degree was 60 credits and almost 4 years. That included clinical internships.
Yeah,
I had like arguably much more education there.
Yeah,
but you're both therapists. Go be therapists.
Right. And in a sense, I get that. I get the idea that all clinicians are, there's a lot of overlap. I talked about that before in the prior videos. It's pretty much, they are quite similar. But the way to rank would be something like, if somebody was trying to rank for whatever reason, like pay scales or whatever, would be number of credits in school and number of years experience and things like that. Things we can measure. But nobody does that. They don't even know what the things mean. They don't even know what the word counselor means versus psychologist versus social worker. The public certainly does not know in general, I think.
And that's the thing. Like at some of those inpatient places, like we were all called counselor. Mm-hmm. Whether you had a bachelor's degree in psychology, because they had bachelor's level clinicians, because they had to be overseen by a supervisor who had a master's degree, but they could do it legally because the license was held by the facility, not by the individuals. So the facility had the license, so the bachelor's level clinicians were counselors.
It's a big loophole.
Yeah. And they could also have technically associates level clinicians because there's associate's degrees in drug and alcohol counseling, specifically drug and alcohol counseling.
That's a whole nother discussion.
It's a whole nother thing. But like we had the bachelor's level clinicians, they were called counselor. And then you had the master's level, and like HR didn't make a distinction between whether it's social work or counseling. They don't care. You're and everyone's just a counselor. Like everybody. So you were either one of the clinical techs on the nursing staff, or you were a counselor. Or you worked in the business stuff upstairs.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, the public doesn't know like a lot of these distinctions, which this is why I think it's important that every licensed professional can treat everybody. Because, the public's emphasis, understandably, is getting treated by somebody competent. Mm-hmm. And, licensure is typically the standard for that. If they, okay, like I don't know what you are, but I know you're licensed.
Yeah.
I can live with that, because again, the fields are so similar. But yeah, we see all kinds of pay discrepancies and that aren't based on any logic.
One of the things that they have for social work degree from an accredited school, as far as I know, is if you get good enough grades or good enough GPA or something for your 4 years at undergrad, you can do your master's degree in 1 year and get a social work master's degree in 1 year. Now, of course, you've gotten good grades. Great. It's a wonderful, indicator perhaps of how you'll do. But getting a master's degree in 1 year, it's impressive, of course, but I don't understand that one. You're missing out on a lot.
I do imagine it would have to be in the right undergrad program. Like I don't think.
Well, yeah, it has to be accredited.
I don't think you. Well, I don't think you could have like an undergrad degree in Russian literature and get that in one.
No,
year, even if you had like a 5.0 GPA.
No, it has to be an accredited social work program, undergrad, and then you can do your master's degree in 1 year.
I think that in those specific instances, the classes that you're taking in undergrad are also part of the master's. Part of those master's level classes, or at least they're setting you up for it.
Sure, but then why would you even have them at all? Like, it sounds like you're just being redundant at that point. And perhaps they are, I don't know. But, I mean, does anybody need to take them at that point then? You know, obviously the grade thing matters, but it seems like a tough sell, at least to me.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good tangent. There's a lot going on with the professions. And I think, returning back to this, a very small group of people design these diagnoses. And I think they generally do a good job considering, but not really in this dissociative family of disorders. Because I think these were protected for a small group of people that were complaining that their fantasy-based section was going to be eradicated.
Our favorite stuff isn't going to be in the book. Put it in there. Make sure it's in there.
Yeah. And the whole, one of the things that I get sick of is the whole people being offended idea, right? The idea that being offended is the worst thing ever. But being offended is the most ridiculous thing ever because I can be offended that you're offended, right? So it's like people say, well, you don't believe in DID, you're hurting people. Well, that offends me. There you go. Now I'm offended. Like it's nonsense. What matters is the evidence that we have to support those type of claims. And I think those are outrageous claims to say to skeptics, because you don't believe in this disorder that we can't even explain or define very well, you're hurting. You're the one hurting people.
Well, that ends up being the argument of you have to prove it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. It's like you're hurting people, so we should always err on the side of caution, right? We should err on the side of it does exist. So you have to prove to us that it doesn't exist. But you're not the one making a claim. I'm not the one making a claim. They're the ones making the claim.
Right, the burden of proof.
The burden of proof goes on the person making the claim.
Yeah, and I would argue that diagnosing somebody correctly is the way to lead to the least harm. So if bipolar, borderline, or sometimes narcissistic personality disorders are better explanations, then who's hurting who, right? By saying that, you have this, multiple personality, it's not possible. I've never seen it.
And there is some harm that can be done in incorrectly diagnosing. And like I said, I tend to use a diagnostics just for getting paid, but there are some things I see. Like I've had many clients come in with showing signs of ADHD, which I'm keenly aware of because I struggle with it on a daily basis. And I know that ADHD can have anxiety and depression type of symptoms surrounding it. And I'll listen to what this person is telling me. Like I've been, 3 different, psychiatrists or 3 different counselors, and I've been with therapists for years, and I've been, got, been told I have depression and I've got anxiety, and I said this when we talked about anxiety in another video. You have one of a variety of anxiety disorders, but everybody has anxiety. But I'll listen to what they're talking about some of the things that they're going through, and I'm like, well, this sounds a lot like ADHD. So very often I'll go grab the DSM out of the break room, bring it out, and be like, okay, you ever go through this? And I just go through the list of diagnostic criteria, and they're like, a couple of them have been like, are you reading my mind? Like, this is the first time we're meeting, and you're telling me all of this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, because what you have isn't depression or anxiety. Those are things that are surrounding a central core of ADHD. And let's see what we can do about helping the ADHD, because very often the depression stuff comes in because of pressure from failing at certain things because you're not paying attention, like poor job performance and pressure to perform in a job that you're just not suited to because ADHD is rampant. And that helps bring down, and then anxiety surrounding, I'm going to get fired from this job because, again, ADHD is impacting job performance. And we talk about the ADHD, we start medication management, people start the medication, and all of a sudden it's like, I feel better than I have in years. Sometimes they quit the job and move on to something else, or they figure out how to do the job well and start getting praise. And it's like, oh my goodness, like how did I go this many years without knowing it, ADHD? And I'm like, okay, but other clinicians were only looking at depression because you said I was feeling down.
They might have said the word even, right? Depressed. I'm
feeling depressed. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, well, that's depression.
Like, what were you diagnosed with? Oh, depression.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with depression.
Yeah. Very few people will say major depressive disorder or persistent depressive disorder, which would be the two main major mood disorders, in addition to bipolar, that you would see. They always say, oh, yeah, I was diagnosed with depression officially. That's not actually a diagnosis.
It's not. Yeah. Or someone was like, I was diagnosed with clinical depression.
It's not in there.
It's not a
diagnosis. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, tell me more about this diagnosis of clinical depression. I'm not familiar with it. I am familiar with major depressive disorder. And yeah, I have had clients who've come in and said, I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. Like, okay.
Sometimes I've been on the phone with clinicians before when I was a supervisor, and I would get so frustrated with all the different words they would put together. We've talked about this, why they just make up things. I'm like, let's just make this easy. I'm holding a copy of the DSM. Tell me the page number. Oh, well, it's not exactly in the DSM. Well, then it's not exactly a disorder.
It's not exactly a diagnosis then.
Right, yeah, a category. Like, you have to give me a page number. All mental health professionals can be very fanciful when it comes to, very creative when it comes to diagnosing.
In fact, a chronic depressive type of dissociative personality disorder. Wait, what?
And they always say with. You ever notice that?
Yeah, with. With psychotic features. Almost always with psychotic features.
With pyromania.
With pyromanic avoidant tendencies. Yeah.
Yeah, I would tend to avoid pyromaniacs too.
All right. So do we have comments this time? We didn't have any questions this time, right?
We got one question.
We got one.
So, and we can't take too much time with this because we know this is a favorite topic, but favorite movie of all time, not movies. So you have to pick one. All right. So favorite movie of all time. And we'll try to stick to not too long talking about it because movies are often the object of our tangents. So we'll try to restrict ourselves there. You guys got one?
So go ahead, Jeff. Okay.
Well, no surprise that mine's Airplane. 1980s Airplane.
With the exclamation point?
With the exclamation point at the end, right. And I always include that. Like, even though sometimes I'll put it in a list or something like that and there's a comma after it, but that's the name of the movie. It's my favorite of all time. I've said it before on here. And I think that I saw it when I was younger and it was on TV or something and it just grabbed hold of me and I was like, I love this, and from there, spoof movies have just been my thing, and I've loved them ever since. So I can quote it pretty well. Like, you give me any scene, I think I'm okay at it. And I haven't watched the movie in a couple years, not because I don't want to, but just I haven't for whatever reason. But I think it'll always be my favorite. It's just one of those things that's just kind of stuck with me.
When I first saw Airplane, it was around 1980, and I think I was like 8, and I knew right away this is one of the best movies ever. With the tail fin going through the clouds, like
the Jaws music.
Yep, we're there.
There was cotton balls apparently that they used, and they just like cut it on a track or something like that. What do you do? Just such a low budget thing.
It was low, but it was deliberately low budget.
Right.
Like they didn't try to act like it was high budget.
Right.
Oh, no.
But they did pay good money for all those very good dramatic actors.
Yeah.
Leslie Nielsen, Lloyd Bridges, Robert Stack. Like there was not a bad actor in that entire movie.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Everybody was good. He's not an actor, and he did a good job. He was getting so mad in that cockpit. It's like with the
just grabs him by the shirt,
dragging him up and down the court for 90 minutes.
90 minutes.
Oh man. So what do you say, Mike?
Oh man, I had a dissociative episode there for a second.
You might go on a Fugue. We might have to keep you here.
So many movies. I've seen so many movies over the years. Trying to pick just one favorite.
You mentioned RoboCop one time.
RoboCop. I love RoboCop. I watched that when I was very young. Yeah, that's a big point of contention for my mother. Like, that's why she thinks the rating system doesn't work, because the kids are just going to go watch RoboCop in the neighbor's house. Because it's what I did. Like, RoboCop is a great movie. It is one of those fantastic favorites that I love to watch every once in a while. Back to the Future, of course, is one of my absolute favorites. Any Star Wars movie, literally any Star Wars movie. If I get down to it, I think the one movie that I can watch anytime, like literally anytime, I can just put it on, is Hudson Hawk. It's just a cult classic. It's Bruce Willis. He's a phenomenal movie. It's very underrated. A lot of people just don't get it. It's kind of a cult classic. But even beyond that, I think there's one movie. There's one movie that just goes beyond that for me. Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon. I don't think anybody's ever seen that movie, but me. It is a phenomenal movie. It is, I think it's billed as a black musical martial arts movie. Like it was from the early 80s or mid 80s. And it's the journey of black martial artist in Harlem trying to find his master, even though his sensei has basically graduated him out. I can't teach you anything else, but he still wants to have this mystical master. And so it's like, here, go on a journey, find your master, your new master, and you'll find, the key to the golden glow. It's just a phenomenally bad, funny movie. But the martial arts is pretty good, and I really like the acting in it. Just, oh man, Shogun Shonuff is the bad guy. I'm not kidding. He calls himself Shogun Shonuff.
I'll have to take a look at that one.
It's so good.
It doesn't surprise me that you'd pick a movie that like is underrated, but that not a lot of people have seen or heard of, or but one that was really meaningful to you, that like just stuck with you after all these years. You know,
Shogun Shonuff was played by Julius Carey, by the way. He was a phenomenal actor until he passed away. I mentioned in one of the other videos, The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. He actually played a role in that show too. Julius Carey, I loved him. He's great. But The Last Dragon, definitely an impactful one from my youth. I'll always remember that movie, and every time I watch it, I'm like, this is so bad, but I love it.
How about you, Dr. Grande?
Oh, it's tough. I would say, so Saving Private Ryan is certainly a huge, I think it's a great movie. But if I were to say like number one, I'd probably have to go with Aliens, 1986. Bill Paxton, great lines, but
Michael Bain,
Weaver. Yeah, who was in Terminator, I believe, 1984.
Lance
Terminator.
Henderson,
Sigourney Weaver, of course. And what I think is, I was trying to think the other day, I was thinking about Aliens, like what makes that movie so good? I think it's because horror movies, people are often running. Like that's all they do. Right? You got the guy with the razor blades or whatever in his hands, whatever, they're running around. Okay, they're getting killed one at a time. That sort of happened in Aliens, but they went there to fight, and they did fight diligently, and it was back and forth, and of course, they made some tactical mistakes and ended up in a bad situation without ammunition. But I think, too, the other part that makes that movie great for me is that if you see Alien, which was okay, 1979, Alien, good movie, you know how bad that one alien was.
Yeah.
So when Sigourney Weaver's like, no, listen, guys, it's really bad down there. If there's like many of them, you can't go down there. You're like, yes, listen to her. Listen to her.
She survived one of these things. It destroyed her crew.
Yeah.
They don't listen. That was another bug hunt. Yeah. That is a classic. I enjoyed that movie as well. And unlike some movies, like when they did definitive editions, like and added footage back in, it didn't detract from it. Some movies, it just makes it drawn out longer and just like, oh, why did they put that back in? But with that movie, it actually makes it better.
Well, they expanded the beginning.
Yeah.
So you see that planet L.
Right, LV 428.
Yep. You see that. and you see the guy going out and like, what is this? You know, like you know what's going to happen.
He finds the same ship. He finds the navigator ship
right
from the first movie.
And then you also see the scene with the sentry guns, which was cut out. It was in the director's cut, but not in the original, which was very meaningful because it explained kind of like how they were thinking about the barricades. And they cut that out because it was like, you know, it was like these counters of guns with like a drum of ammunition, and it was on a pivot, like a tripod. And it was like mowing down the aliens, and you're like, don't run out of ammo. They saw the counter going down, you know, plot device and movie device, and you're like, they stopped. Like you see the smoke coming from the barrel, the counter's like 2 or something, and then that's when they come over the top.
Come up in the ceiling.
Yeah, it was an important scene, but But yeah, the director's cut, excellent. In general, I think it's just a great movie. Very well written. Sometimes sci-fis, especially ones with a lot of action, used to, not so much anymore, but they used to get this reputation as not being well written. But it was very well written. Yeah.
Also, some of the design choices from that movie would inform other science fiction movies later on.
And the sound from that 10mm pulse rifle has become like...
It's iconic. But the models for that were also used later on in Starship Troopers.
Right.
Which is a terrible, terrible movie, but I love it so much.
I think it's a great movie, yeah. For that reason, it was terrible.
Terrible.
Yeah.
The book is way better. The Robert Heinlein book, Starship Troopers. Way better.
Take a look at that. Yeah. They made a sequel to Starship Troopers too, didn't they?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, I didn't that one wasn't good, but I thought the original was... I liked the aesthetic, and it was fun to watch. There was a lot of stuff getting blown up.
Yeah.
it was action packed, and they had space scenes and ground combat. Like it was a high, big budget film. All right. Any other questions? Was that?
So no more questions, but there's a comment that I wanted to read. I thought this one was like just really out there, really, but I mean, funny at the same time. So a comment reads, I chop off my left arm to be able to be there, to be a silent witness to the making of every episode. So there's people willing to chop off their left arm, not their right, but their left arm to be here.
It's much more important than the left.
Depends on which arm you're dominant with, maybe, but nonetheless.
It does depend on a lot of other factors as well.
Yeah, but nonetheless, left arm, just to be here. I thought that was pretty amazing. Thought it was worth saying in this episode.
I think I've heard people say they'd cut off their left arm to get away from wherever I was, but never to actually be here.
The tides have turned. Now they're trying to cut off left arm just to be here.
Apparently.
So either way, a lot of arms being cut off.
Yeah. So we might have to create a section in here for the bleeding people who do not have a left arm anymore, is the moral, of, I think, of that story.
I think what would be more disturbing is the pile of left arms that would be sitting over in the
What
corner.
are we going to do with them? What are we going to do with the left arms?
Make lamps out of them? I don't know. Maybe. Lamps.
Yeah. Makes me wonder if we should ever have a studio audience someday. Now, where we are now, there's not a lot of room.
There is not a lot of room for a studio audience.
There might be room for like 2 people if one has to sit on the treadmill.
I was going to say, somebody can walk on the treadmill, somebody can sit on the exercise bike over there.
That's right. They can exercise well.
There's a rocking chair. We can get at least 3.
Yep.
Sounds like a pretty good audience.
Of course, I think if somebody sat on the exercise bench over there, Sam would get in the way. Like, they wouldn't be able to see much.
So I thought that was a pretty good comment. I mean, yeah, pretty out there.
There is a comment that so many people are like, who's Sam? Like, Sam is our producer.
Sam's the producer.
Sam's our producer.
Say hi, Sam.
How you doing?
I think Sam
He's real.
I think he went to Thurgood Marshall. Did you go to Thurgood Marshall?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, look at that.
Was it as dangerous as Mike was describing with the...
Not quite.
Not as bad inside, right?
Yeah, not as bad.
Yeah. Just watch out for the people who are employed there, apparently.
Yeah, apparently.
That's all you got to do. Yeah. Sam always says that he doesn't like to be recognized. So I'm happy to recognize Sam for all he does.
Yeah, he does a great job. He does a great job.
He had to turn his mic back on. That's telling.
He does have a microphone, not just no camera.
Right.
No camera over there, so we can't cut to that shot. But all the cuts between the different cameras, that's Sam. Yeah. And he has made it into a science. Like he watches us carefully for like when we're going to trade off, and when we're not, we're going to overtalk. Like Sam's figured it out.
Good job, Sam.
I'm going to have to start trying to trip him up.
Never mind.
the nonverbals, right? Like,
Never mind.
And then just go right into talking before I Then he'll just start leaving it on the global for a while.
Or maybe he'll just leave. I don't know.
If we push him too hard.
he'll be stuck on Jeff for the whole. All right, so we'll wrap up there. Someday, I think we should look at a case that has to do specifically with DID, like the Sybil book or Billy Milligan or one of the famous DID cases, and we can really kind of deconstruct that disorder. But dissociative fugue is related to that, so I use some of the same ammunition to blow that one up as I would DID.
Well, it's an easy target.
Yeah, it's painted orange. Yeah, out in the water, pretty easy to dial in with the guns. But yeah, again, it doesn't mean it can't happen. I think that's important to emphasize as we wrap up. It can certainly happen, or something like it can happen. I think it's rare. So, do we have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I don't know that I can really add anything to it. I thought it was interesting, just the family life that was going on at the time. I mean, just understanding Hannah's family life and her parents, of course, being divorced, but also being very religious. Her dad being a missionary, and mom being a pastor, and getting involved with the Quakers in Pennsylvania. And so I thought they had a pretty interesting family dynamic. And I was curious. I wasn't able to find much about that dynamic, just other than their circumstances. Like, not a lot of how Hannah may have felt about that, or so that kind of information I thought would have been helpful. Now, of course, I don't know if anybody really knows how Hannah would have felt about that. Maybe some people, friends or something. Maybe there was a journal or something, or diary. But there seemed to be, of course, we don't know how these things played into what she experienced, but I think it'd be a fascinating thing to dig a little bit deeper on, analyze, and if we could compare it to other cases and see how that might have played into what she experienced. Of course, what she experienced, that's the big part we've been talking about, but I think they had a pretty interesting family life. Not a common one, for sure. There's not a lot of missionaries to begin with, let alone ones who both parents are pastors or are in the ministry in some way. So I think it's pretty interesting and kind of an underlying thing.
Very good. Any thoughts, Mike?
I think that Hannah definitely had a duality in many areas when it came to, and conflicting duality in many areas of her life when it came to a lot of different things, like her father's religious beliefs versus her own self-identity. Growing up, the difference in ideologies between her mother and father. Her decision to be a teacher, and then, but also not wanting to be involved in some ways in that at all. Like she demonstrated a lot of different conflict within herself, which doesn't surprise me. But I think the biggest thing is that this is a diagnosis that actually may be doing more harm than good. In this case, the experts always talk about, well, you could be harming people by ignoring this diagnosis, but in this case, it may be harming Hannah's family because she went missing in September of 2017. Her family is still looking for her today, and it is October 2021. There was an incident. I think it wasn't long after she went missing, but there are people all over the Virgin Islands have been looking for her. There's somebody called up and said, like, I see, like, this would happen all the time. They call up and say, like, she's standing right in front of me. She's right here. You'd come over and find her, and police would go over and either there was nobody there or they found out it wasn't her. But there was one where they called her mother because she was on the island, and her mother went down, and it was like this is her. Like, I know, I'm talking to her. She's in a drug den. She's here. Come get her. And she went down, and her mom went down there, and it wasn't her. And like, that's heartbreaking. But she sat with this young girl, and who had been mistaken for her daughter, and like told her about what had happened and why she had come down, and this young woman who's struggling with substance use stuff was like, I wish I really was her, because then you wouldn't be in this much pain. And I think it's the hope is a wonderful thing until it becomes a painful thing. And I think after this amount of time with no credible sightings, it's unlikely that she'll ever be found. But the idea that she's in this fugue and years can go by and suddenly she'll show up. Now, I could be wrong. I'm perfectly willing to admit that. I'm the first one to admit that I could be wrong about something. She could show up. She could be found next year somewhere in the Philippines, or in Japan, or someplace else where she's been, with no memory of who she was until something brings it back. But until we have any actual evidence of that, her family is left with just this idea that she's out there somewhere, and they won't let go of that and begin their own grieving process. And unfortunately, they probably won't ever. And like I said, hope is a wonderful thing until it becomes a painful thing. That's my thoughts.
Very good. Yeah, I think the fugue is interesting because there is no treatment protocol for it. Right? So other than trying to identify the trauma that may have triggered it, which they could never do because she denied any traumatic history. Mm-hmm. So you have a number of disorders you could have explored that actually have a treatment protocol. You have one that doesn't. You assign the one that doesn't and say, go on your way. This will never happen again. Which diagnosis is more harmful? Yeah. I mean, the point of diagnosing is that it's an explanation and there's a treatment associated with it that can make the symptoms not exist anymore. I think that would be my complaint about pretty much all the dissociative disorders. If there's no treatment for them, then why don't we keep looking? Right? You can always add them as an explanation. You have MDD with DID. Okay, I would take that over saying somebody has DID when there's no way to treat it. I mean, you hear these stories like we confuse the personalities, whatever, but none of those explanations, first of all, they're not consistent. Second of all, they don't make sense. And with the research on the amnesia barrier that shows that the personalities do remember what each other experiences, that pretty much blew DID out of the water. But again, we should come back someday to DID with a case specifically about that, because there's interesting research with amnesia. Okay, so we'll wrap up there. If you have any, I think you mentioned this before, Jeff, if you have any comments, please put them in there, and any questions, we'll consider them for the show. And right now, there's not much competition. We only had one. Right. So if you put one in, it'll probably be selected at this point in our development as a podcast. And of course, comments about anything else. We read every comment. We certainly appreciate it. This was an episode of Alien Lizard Humanoids. We'll have more of these coming up soon. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.